A woman on the subway discovered someone grabbing her thigh. Her scream echoed through the train car. The woman sitting next to her overheard someone mention a pervert. Without asking any questions, she grabbed the young man, Taeyong. Taeyong grabbed Ru Rai, wanting to explain, but she wrenched her hand free. As they pushed back and forth, something unexpected happened. A bottle of 105-degree distilled water fell from above, drenching Taeyong's groin. He doubled over in pain, groaning. After going to the hospital for an examination, he discovered he had second-degree burns. He vowed to find the woman from the subway. The woman he was searching for, Ru Rai, was rushing to her final job interview but lost the opportunity because she arrived late. Shin Mo's words, "If you can't find a job, you'll have to get married," further darkened her mood. Feeling dejected, she went to her boyfriend's place, only to discover he was cheating on her. Ru Rai confronted him, asking why he treated her this way. The other woman taunted her, saying she was such a fool that her boyfriend was easily stolen. Enraged, Ru Rai pushed the other woman to the ground, but her boyfriend defended his mistress and spoke harsh words, deeply hurting Ru Rai. In despair, she went to the rooftop, contemplating suicide, believing her life was meaningless. With her career and love life in shambles, she felt she couldn't face her parents. Suddenly, a newspaper flew in front of her. The news reported someone jumping from a building and landing on a passerby. Ru Rai realized she couldn't harm someone else because of her own problems. After a serious self-reflection on the rooftop, she remembered how she had always obeyed her father's arrangements. This time, she broke the pattern, following her heart. Ru Rai traveled alone to a faraway country. There, she found a job and made sincere friends. She didn't want to return home. Her only worry was her mother. If Shin Mo, after retiring, discovered she was working as a waitress there, she would surely fly across the world to kill her. Ru Rai hoped her friend would keep her secret. She thought she could live peaceful days there, but unexpectedly, the handsome team leader, praised by everyone, had a strange connection to her. He called Ru Rai that pervert, while Taeyong referred to her as the subway girl. It seemed Ru Rai's good days were coming to an end. Taeyong had been hospitalized for 3 months, enduring excruciating pain. He told Ru Rai he had wanted to die, but she thought he deserved his misfortune. Taeyong showed Ru Rai a video recorded by a witness. It turned out Ru Rai's skirt had gotten caught in the subway door. Taeyong was trying to help her pull it free, but the sudden stop of the train caused him to grab her leg. There was even a witness to corroborate his story. Without a word, Taeyong immediately dismissed Ru Rai. Ru Rai truly didn't want to leave. After returning, her friend told her that the 82-year-old distilled water on the subway could make Taeyong infertile. Ru Rai immediately sought out Taeyong to apologize. She saw him exercising and, thinking he was attempting suicide, consoled him not to do anything rash. Seeing Ru Rai's guilt-ridden expression, Taeyong couldn't help but be amused by her foolishness. He took this opportunity to demand she pay his hospital bills. Ru Rai hoped to continue working and deduct the expenses from her wages. Seeing Ru Rai reminded Taeyong of the subway nightmare, so he immediately dismissed her again. At that moment, a senior colleague rushed in, saying there were 2 difficult clients outside who wanted Taeyong to personally attend to them. Ru Rai volunteered to be his assistant. After seeing who the clients were, Ru Rai regretted her decision. The clients were Sang Ho and Ae Rai, the couple who had betrayed her. Sang Ho was there to propose to Ae Rai. Not wanting Sang Ho to know she worked there, Ru Rai quickly fled the scene. Sang Ho wanted to delegate the proposal decorations, but Ae Rai insisted on making things difficult for Ru Rai. Sang Ho found Ru Rai and threatened to tell Shin Mo about her job if she didn't help. Ru Rai had no choice but to accept the task. Before the proposal, Sang Ho asked to borrow money from her because his current girlfriend, Ae Rai, spent money like water and had already exceeded his budget. Sang Ho used the same threat to coerce Ru Rai into lending him money. Ae Rai saw them meeting privately. When the romantic proposal actually began, Ae Rai seized the opportunity to falsely accuse Ru Rai of tearing her wedding dress. Ru Rai had just handed the dress to her, completely intact. Ru Rai thought she was making a scene, but Ae Rai claimed Ru Rai was jealous and intentionally sabotaging their sacred love. Without a word, Sang Ho raised his hand to hit Ru Rai. Fortunately, Taeyong was nearby and stopped him. Taeyong spoke eloquently on Ru Rai's behalf, pleading for their forgiveness. But Ae Rai insisted on finding the general manager to fire Ru Rai. Ru Rai had no choice but to apologize profusely, but Ae Rai wouldn't let it go, demanding Ru Rai kneel and kowtow. Ru Rai couldn't take it anymore. She lashed out at Ae Rai. Without another word, the two women lunged at each other. Ru Rai pushed Ae Rai into the water. Seeing this, Sang Ho rushed to protect his girlfriend. In the end, both he and Ru Rai fell into the water. Ti Yang, seeing this, jumped in to protect Ru Rai. The four of them fought in the water, creating a chaotic scene. Seeing Ru Rai being bullied, her friends came to her aid. The situation became utter pandemonium. The commotion only ended when the general manager appeared. Young Hai had spent 34 years with her husband, navigating the daily grind of life. Yet, on the day of his retirement, she resolutely handed him divorce papers. Although not officially divorced, it was as good as. It meant that from now on, they would live separate lives. Shin Mo couldn't understand why his wife would do this. In everyone's eyes, he was a perfect husband, even a wonderful father. Angrily, Shin Mo accused his wife of being heartless and unreasonable. He argued that he had toiled tirelessly for their family for 34 years. Yet, the moment he retired, Young Hai wanted to draw a clear line between them. Young Hai couldn't take it anymore and finally exploded. "I'm sick of your domineering ways. The thought of having to see you every day after your retirement suffocates me. I endured it for 34 years for the sake of our children. Now, I don't want to endure it for another minute." Hearing his wife's complaints, Shin Mo flew into a rage, flipping the table. Seeing that communication was impossible, Young Hai turned and left. Shin Mo, feeling humiliated, demanded she return immediately. But Young Hai didn't look back as she walked out of the restaurant. Young Hai was like many other housewives. She stayed home, taking care of her husband and children, managing the household, doing the most tiring work, yet receiving no respect. Even turning on the air conditioner earned her a reprimand from her husband, who reminded her that he had worked in 50-degree heat, while she idled at home in comfort. He didn't even want to take her out. Even when they dined out together, he only talked about his own accomplishments, completely ignoring her contributions. Shin Mo assumed his wife was just sulking and asked their daughter to persuade Young Hai. But he discovered he couldn't reach his daughter. Shin Mo was still dwelling on the previous day's events. He told his wife to kneel and apologize, and he would forgive her, but she told him to sign the divorce papers immediately. Shin Mo said they should wait for their daughter to return before making any decisions. Sun wanted to mediate his parents' conflict, so he arranged a dinner for them. He and his wife, along with Chun Ok, went to a nearby table to have tea, leaving his parents some privacy. Shin Mo's first words were to blame his wife for embarrassing him in front of his in-laws. He didn't understand why, after treating his wife so well, even remembering her birthday while overseas, she would want a divorce. At the mention of birthdays, Young Hai's expression darkened. Have you ever seen someone gift their wife a refrigerator for her birthday, solely so she could make kimchi for him? Have you ever seen someone celebrate their anniversary by complaining about the expensive restaurant food and ultimately ordering 2 bowls of fried rice for lunch? Even more telling, Young Hai had once tried to rekindle their romance, but Shin Mo was completely oblivious to her feelings, even mocking her age and appearance. What wife could endure such a husband? With disappointments accumulating bit by bit, Young Hai finally resolved to get a divorce. Her heart was full of resentment, with no one to confide in. In Shin Mo's eyes, she was just a useless, idle person, like a maid. She did laundry and cooked every day, but he took her contributions for granted. When he was in a bad mood, he took it out on her. He even blamed her for their daughter not finding a good job. Their son's marriage was another headache for her. He single-handedly arranged for his son to be a live-in son-in-law. In their family, the husband was supreme. Shin Mo believed he was only thinking of his children's best interests. Even their son and daughter-in-law advised her to be submissive, but she had endured for over 30 years and didn't want to endure any longer. Seeing his wife's unwavering defiance, Shin Mo became furious. Finally, he uttered, "Divorce is better than separation." And then he left. The next day, the two went to finalize their divorce. Shin Mo signed the papers slowly, repeatedly asking his wife if she had all the necessary documents. In contrast to his ambivalent words, his wife's demeanor remained resolute. After submitting the divorce papers, Shin Mo received a call from an old friend and had to leave. Before departing, he reminded his wife to remember her belongings when she moved out. Shin Mo attended his friend's funeral, where he learned that his friend and his friend's wife had been separated in their home for over 10 days without anyone noticing. Hearing his friend's story chilled him to the bone. He returned home drunk, just as his wife was packing her things. Shin Mo aggressively pulled her back and pinned her against the wall. Fearful of ending up like his friend, he refused to let her leave. After the commotion, his drunkenness began to wear off. Shin Mo pleaded, saying he couldn't live without her. He had humbled himself, so he expected his wife to soften. She realized he still hadn't grasped his mistakes, only concerned with whether or not someone would take care of him. Overwhelmed with anger, she lashed out, releasing years of pent-up frustration. Shin Mo took his wife to a place, the most difficult place they had lived when they were young and still deeply in love. He had given up his dreams and defied both their families to be with her. The beautiful days of their past seemed so vivid. They had gradually lost their way amidst the struggles of daily life. Shin Mo clearly remembered the joy of buying their first car. He would drive for hours just to see his wife and daughter sleeping, then drive the long road back. He had only focused on providing a better life for his family, but couldn't understand what he had done wrong to bring them to this point. The two sat in the car, sobbing uncontrollably. The next day, So-won took her father to the airport. He instructed Sun to take good care of her mother. He was going to find their daughter, believing that young Hai might reconsider if she listened to her. Since childhood, Shin Mo had instilled in his daughter the idea that she had to strive for first place, believing that only the top spot garnered attention. This swimming competition was no different. Initially, Ru Rai performed well, but she cramped up mid-race and nearly drowned. Driven to please her father, she had pushed herself to the limit. Ultimately, she didn't win, leaving her father deeply disappointed. He disregarded her near-death experience, stomped on her goggles, and berated her for embarrassing him. Ru Rai watched his retreating figure with sadness. Growing up, Ru Rai became sensitive and insecure. She felt she had never done anything to make her father proud. Now, unemployed, she lacked the courage to go home. Ti-young intended to take Ru Rai to the airport, but suddenly changed course and took her to a magic show. Ru Rai, having never seen one before, was amazed. After the show, Ti-young explained that he took her to the magic show to emphasize the importance of self-confidence in magic. He hoped that in the future, no matter what she faced, she could be as confident as a magician. After they parted ways, Ti-young left first. After careful consideration, Ru Rai couldn't bear to go home and waited for him outside his apartment. She asked Ti-young to let her stay for a week, promising to move out as soon as she found a new place. Unable to persuade her otherwise, Ti-young relented. He even made her buy bibimbap, showed her to her room, and then went to bed. In the middle of the night, Ru Rai sleepwalked into Ti-young's room and kicked him out of bed. Ti-young woke up startled and almost threw her out. Seeing her sleeping soundly, he covered her with a blanket and noticed red spots on her face. He carried her towards the living room, intending to take her to the hospital when she woke up. It turned out she was allergic to alcohol, and the bibimbap Ti-young had made contained wine. Ti-young told Ru Rai to go home the next day. Ru Rai begged him not to send her away. Ti-young reluctantly prepared cucumber juice to help with the allergic reaction. The CEO wouldn't tolerate her and told her to leave. Ti-young learned about this and decided to help Ru Rai. Myung Rang witnessed this and relayed the information to Ru Rai. Myung Rang believed Ti-young definitely liked her and advised her to act quickly if she didn't want to regret it. Preparing to return home the next day, Ru Rai invited Ti-young to dinner. However, she was so nervous that she couldn't look at him, let alone confess her feelings. Even while cutting her steak, her hands trembled, making Ti-young notice her unusual behavior. After dinner, they took a walk together. In this beautiful and romantic setting, Ti-young wanted to take some pictures of Ru Rai as a memento. Her sweet smile in the camera lens captivated him. Time seemed to stand still in that moment. After taking pictures, they strolled along the beach. Ru Rai enjoyed the gentle, relaxed atmosphere of the evening. She truly loved this place and wouldn't want to leave if she didn't have to. Thinking about never seeing the man she liked again, Ru Rai mustered her courage and kissed Ti-young, then lowered her head and apologized like a child who had misbehaved. Unexpectedly, Ti-young kissed her back. When Ru Rai looked up, she was startled to see Shin Mo nearby, glaring furiously. Shin Mo charged towards them in a rage, grabbed Ti-young, pinned him to the ground, and yelled at him. After struggling to pull Shin Mo off, Ru Rai hastily explained the situation to her father. But Shin Mo angrily questioned whether she was working at a hotel instead of the tourism office, and if she was living with this man. Ru Rai knelt down, repeatedly apologizing and explaining that it wasn't what he thought. But Shin Mo declared he wanted to sever ties with her. He wouldn't care what she did from now on. Despite Ru Rai's pleas, Shin Mo remained unmoved, leaving with a resolute finality. Ti-yong pulled Ru Rai's suitcase and accompanied her to the airport, hoping she would go home with her father. But she was too afraid to face him. Suddenly, Ru Rai spotted Shin Mo, still glaring at her. She instantly recoiled like a frightened rabbit. Ru Rai approached her father and meekly confessed. After failing her job interview, she hadn't dared to tell him. With no place to go after losing her job, she had stayed at Ti-yong's. Ti-yong corroborated her story. Shin Mo asked, "Then what was I witnessing on the beach?" Both Ru Rai and Ti-yong were speechless. Shin Mo pressed further, asking his daughter if she was serious about Ti-yong. After receiving an affirmative answer, he turned to Ti-yang and asked him if he liked his daughter. Ti-yong, however, replied that he hadn't thought it through. This response deeply disappointed Shin Mo. He couldn't believe Ru Rai had found such an irresponsible man. Ti-yong had bought Ru Rai's plane ticket, expressing his gratitude and promising to visit. Ru Rai assumed Ti-yong's words to her father were due to the aftereffects of anesthesia. But even if that were true, she still liked him. Ti-yang clarified that there were no aftereffects. The kiss on the beach was just a product of the atmosphere. Hearing this, Ru Rai was heartbroken, realizing she had been delusional. She told Ti-yong she didn't want to see him again and boarded her flight without looking back, leaving Ti-yang standing there, stunned. The man who had just returned home kicked his wife out, pushing her out the door and immediately locking it. He told her through the closed door that he didn't want to see her again and that from now on, only Sun was his family. Just 10 minutes earlier, Shin Mo had intended to have his daughter return home from abroad and convince her mother not to divorce. Unexpectedly, not only had his daughter hidden her job situation, but the man she liked had rejected her just days before. As Ru Rai sadly flew home, Ti-yang realized he liked her too. He frequently revisited the places they had been, looking at the photos they took to remember her. Back in Korea, a food company was hiring a menu developer. Ti-yong decided to return and participate in the culinary competition. The next day, he and his friend boarded a plane back home. His family warmly welcomed him back. Ti-yong's family situation was unusually complex. Hwa Young had given birth to him out of wedlock. He didn't even know who his biological father was. Hwa Young remarried and had a son, Woo Chu. She married a man 10 years younger than her. The girl was the daughter of Young-doo's half-brother. After his brother and sister-in-law passed away, the child lived with their family. Despite this, the family lived harmoniously. Everyone was curious about Ti-yong's sudden return, wondering if he had found someone special. Ti-yong didn't hide it from his family and frankly admitted it. As soon as Myung Rang returned to the country, she arranged to meet with Ru Rai. Coincidentally, it was Ru Rai's scheduled blind date, and Myung Rang, wanting to create an opportunity for Ru Rai and Ti-yong, volunteered to go in her place. She then directed Ru Rai to a food company. At that time, Ti-yong was about to contact Myung Rang. Turning around, he saw Ru Rai. Their eyes met, a lifetime of unspoken words hanging between them. Upon learning she was to be Ti-yong's assistant, Ru Rai immediately refused the job. Ti-yong, anxious to follow Ru Rai, had the items he was carrying knocked to the ground by someone else. He could only bend down to pick them up. At that moment, a woman noticed Ti-yong. This woman was Young-doo's mother. She believed Hwa Young had ulterior motives for marrying her son. Even Hwa Young's son strongly disliked Ti-yong and didn't want him in the competition. Finding the elevator too slow, Ti-yong opted to take the stairs. After a while, he suddenly sensed someone behind him. Before he could turn around, he was pushed down the stairs. When he looked up, the staircase was empty. Ti-yong, enduring the pain, called Ru Rai for help. He explained his injury and asked her to be his assistant. Unwilling to forfeit the competition she'd long prepared for, Ru Rai reluctantly agreed. Compared to the other professional chefs, Ru Rai, a novice in this setting, was clumsy and flustered. As the competition neared its end, she rushed around, nearly setting the small kitchen on fire. Ru Rai lost confidence, believing herself incompetent. Ti-yong patiently comforted and encouraged her, saying that as long as she believed in herself, she could do it. They returned to the competition area. Finally, they collaborated and successfully completed their dish. To their surprise, they received praise. If they passed the third round next week, Yang could secure a position at the company. After the competition, Ru Rai accompanied Yang to the hospital for treatment. Yang took the opportunity to confess his feelings and apologize for hurting Ru Rai in the past. He expressed his desire to return to the country for her and hoped she would give him a chance to start over. They went to a restaurant for dinner. Yang stepped outside to take a call, coincidentally walking past Ru Rai's parents. Shin Mo, seeing Yang, warned him to stay away from his daughter. Hearing her father's voice, Ru Rai panicked and tried to escape. However, her shirt caught on a wine glass, shattering it. Ru Rai's parents looked in her direction. Ru Rai hid under the table. When she looked up, she made eye contact with her mother, Young Hai. To protect her daughter, Young Hai urged her husband to leave. Ru Rai, too afraid to come out, snuck into the restroom. But the women's restroom was crowded, with no place to hide, so she ran into the men's room. Just then, Shin Mo knocked on the restroom door. Ru Rai frantically texted Yang's mother for help. Thanks to a staff member claiming the restroom was out of order, Yang and Ru Rai quickly slipped away. They breathed a sigh of relief once outside. Unexpectedly, Shin Mo, dissatisfied with the restaurant's restroom, decided to take his wife to a different restaurant. Ru Rai, hearing her father's voice again, was terrified. Yang gave her his jacket. Shin Mo, suspicious, started to approach. But just then, Yang's driver arrived. Yang quickly pushed Ru Rai into the driver's seat, jumped into the passenger seat, and sped off. Shortly after, Ru Rai received a call from her father. He was relieved after confirming she had just finished her blind date. After today's events, Ru Rai was petrified and decided not to see Yang again. She didn't want to be an unfilial daughter any longer. Yang understood that Ru Rai went abroad to take control of her life, not wanting to live according to her father's arrangements. He said he would patiently wait for her answer. Shin Mo gave his daughter spending money, reminding her not to let others pay on dates. Ru Rai awkwardly accepted the money. When he mentioned setting up another blind date, she broke out in a cold sweat. As Young Hai entered the room with the keys, Ru Rai quickly declined her father's offer. Seeing this, Young Hai volunteered to take her daughter. She then pulled Ru Rai out of the house. Shin Mo remarked on how thoughtful they had become. He was unaware that Young Hai knew her daughter wasn't going on a date, but to the third round of the culinary competition. She could only help her daughter conceal the truth. When they arrived at Yang's workshop, Young Hai had a fairly good impression of the young man. She began inquiring about his family background. Yang answered honestly to every question Young Hai posed. As she learned about his complicated family situation, Young Hai grew increasingly impatient, unable to sit still any longer, and suggested they leave. Ru Rai chased after her, saying, "It's disrespectful to Yang for you to just leave like this, Young Hai." Young Hai stated her disapproval of Ru Rai's involvement with Yang. She worried her daughter would be negatively affected by his family circumstances. She hoped Ru Rai would learn from her own experiences and avoid future hardship in her own marriage. No matter how much Ru Rai pleaded, Young Hai refused to budge. She said if Ru Rai saw Yang again, she wouldn't cover for her with Shin Mo. After careful consideration, Ru Rai, believing her mother was right, suggested that they shouldn't see each other again after the competition ended. Yang hoped to redefine their relationship after the competition's conclusion. The dish for this round of the competition was for Chairman Calvin. They researched Calvin online. Ru Rai felt she had met him somewhere before. She called Sang Ho and learned that Calvin was the father of his current girlfriend. Before the age of 18, Calvin lived in an orphanage. He was later adopted and became a tycoon in the culinary industry. Confidently, the two arrived at the company for the competition. They happened to see Calvin returning from abroad. Suddenly, Calvin stopped in front of Yang and greeted him warmly. Yang felt Calvin must have mistaken him for someone else. Seeing this, Sun Young worried that Yang would be favored and planned to sabotage him behind the scenes. Everyone quickly arrived at the competition area. The theme for this round was to create a dish using frozen ingredients. One by one, the contestants went to the freezer to gather their ingredients. To speed up the thawing process, Yang asked Ru Rai to heat some hot water, assuring her he could handle the rest. After Min Ho left, only Yang remained in the freezer. Young Hayek locked the door from the outside, hoping to prevent Yang from participating in the competition. Young Hayek smirked upon receiving confirmation. When Yang finally gathered all the ingredients and prepared to return, he discovered the door was locked and he didn't have his phone. After a considerable amount of time, Ti-young still hadn't returned. Ru-rai, abandoning her own preparations, went looking for him. Young Hyuk immediately reminded her that if both of them left their stations, they would be disqualified. Ru-rai could only wait anxiously. As time ticked by, Ru-rai grew more worried. Disregarding the consequences, she rushed out of the competition area. Even if it meant disqualification, Ru-rai had to ensure Ti-young's safety. Reaching the freezer, hearing no sound from inside, Ru-rai called Ti-young, only to discover his phone in her bag. Left with no other choice, Ru-rai sought help from the security guard. The security guard opened the door. Ru-rai rushed inside and found Ti-young frozen stiff. By evening, Ti-young finally regained consciousness. They went to a scenic spot, lay on the ground looking at the stars, and confided in each other. After this incident, Ru-rai understood her own heart. She wanted Ti-young by her side. No matter the storms ahead, Ru-rai was determined to face them together with him. The next day, they visited Calvin to explain the previous day's situation. Calvin immediately invited them to his office. Ti-young presented Calvin with a specialty dish from his hometown. The dish before him evoked old memories for Calvin. He recalled the last meal he had at the orphanage before being adopted. It was the most delicious meal of his life. Calvin was deeply touched by Ti-young's gesture. He took out a bracelet he had kept for years and asked Ti-young if he remembered it. It turned out that 7 years prior, while vacationing in Bali, he had fallen ill and couldn't even drink water. One day, he ate a dish prepared by Ti-young and recovered. To him, Ti-young was his lifesaver. The bracelet was also a gift from Ti-young that year. It was originally given to Ti-young by his mother for protection, but he gave it to a stranger. From that day on, Calvin remembered the young man and had been searching for him over the years. Calvin offered Ti-young a position in the development department. Sun Young immediately protested, claiming it was unfair. But Calvin believed a chef's heart was paramount. Ti-young's sincerity alone qualified him to be his chef. Ti-young's acceptance meant Ru-rai could start working as his assistant. Both were overjoyed. Suddenly, a phone call from Young Hai shattered their happiness. It seemed Shin Mo had discovered the matchmaking scheme. He'd found out about the friend who went on the blind date in Ru-rai's place. To confirm his suspicions, Shin Mo rushed to Young Hai's apartment and immediately called his daughter. Arriving at Myung Rang's doorstep, Shin Mo rang the bell repeatedly, but no one answered. It turned out Myung Rang wasn't home. Young Hai had quickly whisked her away. They finally made it out of the building, only to have the blind date show up at Myung Rang's door. After learning each other's identities, they all started talking. The three women made an excuse to leave the car and ditch the blind date to avoid being discovered. When the man followed them to the parking lot, Myung Rang finally admitted to the setup. Ru-rai hoped the man would help cover for them with Shin Mo. Instead, realizing he'd been tricked, the man flew into a rage, yelling at the two women like a madman before driving off. Young Hai was appalled. This was definitely not the kind of man she wanted for her daughter. Shin Mo waited a long time, but the man never came upstairs. Then, a delivery driver, mistaking Shin Mo for a resident, handed him a package addressed to Myung Rang. Putting this together with a blind date's words, Shin Mo asked a friend to send him a photo they'd taken together. Finally, the truth dawned on him: his daughters had deceived him. Fuming, Shin Mo returned home. This time, Ru-rai would face serious consequences. He immediately called Sun and told her to come home that evening. That night, Young Hai secretly called Ru-rai. Overhearing from outside the door, Shin Mo realized he was being double-crossed again. He tried to contain his anger. When So-won arrived home, instead of confronting her directly as before, Shin Mo subtly questioned her about her day. Upon discovering his daughter's continued lies, his anger finally erupted. He ordered both his wife and daughter to kneel, intending to give them a severe lecture. Suddenly, Young Hai pulled her daughter to her feet and rebuked her husband. "You said you'd respect me, but you humiliate me in front of our children. Is this how you treat your partner?" Ru-rai also pleaded with her father to let her make her own choices. Enraged, Shin Mo once again kicked them both out of the house. Young Hai took her daughter and left without looking back. The two women went to a karaoke bar, singing their hearts out and escaping their troubles. They fully unleashed their pent-up joy. Young Hai sighed, feeling a great weight lifted from her shoulders. She told Ru-rai that even if her father disapproved, she should still go work at the food company. Compared to the crazed blind date, Young Hai still hoped Ru-rai would choose Ti-young, but but cautioned her to be observant. Young Hai's encouragement filled Ru Rai with renewed energy. Shin Mo slept on the sofa all night. Waking to a silent house, he found his wife gone. Remembering how he'd kicked them out, he worried they'd slept on the street. Suddenly, he received a notification for a hefty credit card charge. His concern turned to annoyance. He'd been worried about them being cold and hungry, but it turned out Young Hai had checked into a luxury hotel. Just then, Young Hai returned home with her belongings. Shin Mo immediately accused her of extravagance and demanded her credit card. Young Hai retorted, "Do what you want, I already maxed it out." Young Hai declared that after 34 years of marriage, she finally understood. She wouldn't cater to his bad habits anymore. If Shin Mo continued to yell, make her kneel, and kick her out, he'd grow old alone. Shin Mo was taken aback but still tried to argue, accusing her of betrayal, deceit, and reckless spending. Young Hai held her ground and gave him a piece of her mind. Finally, Shin Mo admitted his fault, grudgingly saying, "Fine, spend whatever you want." At that moment, Myung Rang arrived and called the blind date right in front of them. The man's rude and disrespectful words on the other end of the line shattered Shin Mo's perception. Heeding the advice of his wife and Myung Rang, a distraught Shin Mo went to the park to clear his head. He thought about his wife's words, realizing that if he continued this way, he would truly be alone. Suddenly, he saw a homeless person in the park. The thought of ending up like that sent a jolt of fear through him, and he fled in a panic. In his haste, he ran across the street and was struck by a passing car. Even more shockingly, the car was driven by Yeonju and Chun Ok. Shin Mo woke up in the hospital again. He asked Yeonju and Chun Ok to keep the accident a secret. Later, he lamented to Chun Ok, complaining, "Do you know what I did wrong? I've lived my whole life like a machine, working hard, but rarely caring for my family." Chun Ok advised him to spend more time with his wife. She even shared some tips on how to do so. Just then, Yeonju entered the room with a bouquet, but hidden within the flowers were real bills. She hoped Shin Mo would give them to Young Hai as a peace offering. Back downstairs, Shin Mo was touched to see his wife, but still maintained a gruff exterior. He presented her with the flowers, claiming he found them on the street, and suggested she use the money to buy clothes. Seeing his goodwill gesture, Young Hai gave him another chance. The tension between them dissipated. Ru Rai had finally landed a job. Excited for her first day, she arrived at the company early, determined to make the most of this opportunity. But she was in for a rude awakening. It turned out the woman who stole her ex-boyfriend was not only the chairman's adopted daughter, but also her new boss. The memory of their previous fight was still fresh in her mind. The arrogant Ae Rai clearly wasn't going to let her off easy. She assigned Ru Rai, who had no restaurant experience, to work in the kitchen. Ru Rai resented this unfair treatment. She had been hired and trained for a different role, yet Ae Rai insisted she start in the kitchen. Ae Rai warned Ru Rai that any mistake would send her straight back to the kitchen permanently. Taking advantage of the situation, she snatched a hair from Ru Rai's clothing, a move witnessed by Ti Yang as he passed by. Ru Rai started her shift as a waitress, but was immediately confronted by a complaining customer who claimed she had served him food with a hair on it. He humiliated her in front of everyone, presenting the hair as evidence. After the customer left, Ae Rai ordered Ru Rai back to the kitchen. Ru Rai looked helplessly at Ti Yang, but he offered no assistance. Ae Rai and the customer then exchanged smug glances. It was all a setup to force Ru Rai to quit. Although Ti Yang didn't directly intervene, he discreetly gathered evidence. Ru Rai endured a grueling day, constantly harassed and given the most menial tasks. After everyone else left the kitchen, Ae Rai told Ru Rai to quit if she couldn't handle it, threatening to make her life even more miserable otherwise. To add insult to injury, Ae Rai deliberately broke a glass and made Ru Rai clean it up. Ru Rai had no choice but to comply. By the time she got home, she felt utterly exhausted. But what angered her most wasn't Ae Rai's bullying, but Ti Yang's indifference. As Ru Rai stewed in her frustration, Ti Yang suddenly appeared behind her, acting as if nothing had happened. He tried to engage her in conversation, but she ignored him and boarded the bus. Undeterred, Ti Yang sat beside her. He followed her as she moved seats, determined to lighten her mood with jokes and playful antics. Ru Rai was furious but couldn't find an outlet for her anger. The next day, Ru Rai arrived early to clean the restrooms. The work was far from what she'd envisioned, endless running around in a hot, dirty kitchen, but remembering Ae Rai's threats, she refused to give up easily. However, Ae Rai continued her torment. Under the pretense of searching for something, she ripped open a garbage bag and forced Ru Rai to sort through the trash. Faced with the stench, Ru Rai reluctantly began sorting the garbage by hand, only to cut herself on a shard of glass from the previous night. By the time she finished, everyone else had already eaten. Taeyong told her he'd saved her a portion of shrimp fried rice. Excited, she rushed to the kitchen, only to find the pot empty. Resigned, Ru Rai settled for instant noodles. Ae Rai mocked her for eating such cheap food in an Italian restaurant, claiming it ruined the ambience. It became clear that Ru Rai's missing food was also part of Ae Rai's scheme. Not content, Ae Rai then knocked over Ru Rai's noodles, scalding her. Ru Rai cried out in pain. Her co-workers rushed over, but instead of helping, they doused her with cold water. Ru Rai was a miserable mess. Taeyong finally intervened, rushing to her side and helping her up. Unrepentant, Ae Rai continued to order Ru Rai to clean up the mess. She continued her verbal assault, while the other employees pretended not to notice. Even Taeyong only told her to change her clothes. Finally, Ru Rai couldn't take it anymore and ran outside, sobbing uncontrollably. Taeyong told her to clean up and get back to work, but Ru Rai was ready to quit. Ru Rai's anger wasn't solely directed at Ae Rai's humiliation, but also at Taeyong's inaction. She threw down her apron and started to walk away. Finally, after a silent, internal struggle and a further appeal from Taeyong, Ru Rai picked up her apron again, tears streaming down her face. In the locker room, Ru Rai received a call from her mother. Hearing her mother's voice, Ru Rai's eyes started to sting. Trying to keep her mother from worrying, she fought back tears. Her mother told her that her father had agreed to let her work. Ru Rai could sense her mother's excitement and the expectations she had for her. A spark of hope rekindled within Ru Rai, and she resolved to bravely change herself. When Ru Rai once again stepped into the familiar kitchen, faced with instructions, she obediently complied and actively cooperated with the chef's actions. The kitchen was busy as always, but she didn't utter a single complaint. Taeyong was delighted to see Ru Rai's transformation. A busy day finally came to an end. When Ru Rai opened her locker, she found a note from Taeyong, along with gifts for her and Young Hai. Reading the note, Ru Rai was deeply touched. A young man brought his girlfriend home to meet his parents. The girl's gentle demeanor pleased them. However, when they learned she was a nurse, Shin Mo's satisfaction diminished by half. He felt Su Mai wasn't worthy of his son, a medical student. Furthermore, her father had passed away, leaving behind a seriously ill mother and 2 younger sisters. Sun wanted to get engaged to his girlfriend before his military enlistment. Even Young Hai thought it was too rushed, but Shin Mo readily agreed. However, after that, there was no news from the girl. It wasn't until his enlistment day that Sun received a letter from Su Mai. She wrote that she had gotten married and was moving abroad, where the economic conditions were better, and she could take care of her family. From now on, they would go their separate ways. His girlfriend's betrayal devastated So-won. After his discharge, he accepted his father's arrangement and married a wealthy woman, living in a luxurious house. Chun Ok even opened a hospital for him. He suddenly became someone everyone admired. However, he had no feelings for Yeonju. Aside from coming home to sleep, he usually avoided her. On weekends, he lied about working overtime at the hospital, but in reality, he secretly rented a place and lived a leisurely life on his own. One day, upon returning home, his wife told him she was pregnant. While Yeonju was ecstatic, So-won remained calm. Since his wife's supposed pregnancy, his attitude towards her softened considerably. Chun Ok took Yeonju to the hospital for a checkup. The results revealed she wasn't pregnant, but rather, she was diagnosed with infertility. This discovery left her heartbroken. Yeonju and her mother went to see a fortune teller. The fortune teller's baseless pronouncements angered them to the point of wanting to assault him. So-won's parents were overjoyed upon hearing the news of Yeonju's supposed pregnancy. Young Hai brought her tonics, hoping she would have a peaceful pregnancy. Shin Mo even named the baby Dalan Orchid. Looking at her hopeful in-laws, Yeonju couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. Just after finishing a surgery, Sun was called away by a nurse. There was a child in ragged clothes on the stairs. Before So-won could understand what was happening, he received an anonymous phone call instructing him to take care of the child. The caller said this was his chance to atone for his sins and then quickly hung up. So Won took Hanjol in for a checkup. Fortunately, Hanjol was fine, just malnourished. When asked about his guardian, Hanjol turned away without a word. From the guardianship tag, he traced it back to a woman who had brought Hanjol in. The nurse also posted information online. Hanjol's kindergarten teacher proactively contacted him. So Won sought her out to learn more about Hanjol's situation. When he learned the guardian's identity, he was utterly shocked. It was his former girlfriend, the one who had betrayed him. The next day, So Won sought out the woman at the hospital. The woman was Su Jai, Su Mai's younger sister. So Won asked why she had left Hanjol in his care. Su Jai claimed he had ruined Su Mai's life, and now he had to take responsibility. She also told So Won that Su Mai was in prison. If he didn't believe her, he could verify it himself. That evening, at home, So Won felt guilty towards his wife. His wife was supposedly pregnant, and yet he had caused this trouble. Even though Yeonju didn't know what had happened, she was deeply worried. When Yeonju and Chun Ok went to the hospital for another checkup, the results shattered their last hopes. After careful consideration, Yeonju decided to tell So Won. However, when they met, before Yeonju could speak, So Won presented a gift he had prepared for the baby. Seeing this, Yeonju was overwhelmed with a mix of emotions and burst into tears. Finally, Chun Ok couldn't bear it any longer and explained everything to her son-in-law. Yeonju confessed that she was afraid So Won would look down on her, so she hadn't dared to tell him. Seeing Yeonju's heartbroken tears, So Won silently resolved to treat her well in the future. So Won handed Hanjol over to the police. Unexpectedly, Hanjol refused to go with them, pulling out a photo of So Won and insisting he was his father, leaving So Won stunned. To confirm whether Hanjol was his son, So Won personally visited Su Mai in prison. Su Mai admitted that Hanjol was their child. She explained that years ago, Shin Mo had forced them to break up, leaving her with no choice. She even showed him the scar from her C-section. So Won couldn't accept this truth. He couldn't believe his father had ruined his first love. He immediately called his father and asked him to come to his apartment. When Shin Mo saw Hanjol, he was utterly astonished. So Won explained Hanjol's situation to his father. Finally, Shin Mo confessed. Before his enlistment, Su Mai had met with him privately. Learning that Shin Mo disapproved of their marriage, Su Mai, while outwardly obedient, remained remarkably calm. She revealed her pregnancy and asked for money to handle the situation, as her mother needed a liver transplant. They reached an agreement, and Su Mai disappeared from their lives. That day, Shin Mo visited Su Mai in prison. He learned she had embezzled funds. He produced the guarantee letter Su Mai had written years ago, questioning why she had broken her promise. Su Mai said she couldn't bring herself to abort the child and confirmed it was So Won's. If he didn't believe her, he could get a DNA test. Shin Mo agreed to Su Mai's proposal. The 60-year-old man taking the child for a DNA test happened to be seen by Yeonju and Chun Ok. The two women conjured up all sorts of strange scenarios. Returning home, they gossiped, speculating that the child must be Shin Mo's. That's why his wife had wanted a divorce before. They decided to tell So Won this shocking news. He almost choked upon hearing it and quickly stopped his wife from telling his mother. He hoped they would patiently wait for the test results. Son told his father about the situation. Because his father had taken Hanjol for the DNA test, everyone assumed the child was his. Shin Mo was furious. At 60, he had never faced such an injustice. But then, he thought he should feel lucky. He decided to take the blame for Son. Afterward, he went home, greeted his wife, and went to bed. These past few days had shown him how tiring childcare could be. As soon as his head hit the pillow, he fell asleep. In his dream, he saw his wife discovering their secret, and So Won being mercilessly kicked out of the house. Shin Mo woke up in a cold sweat. Young Hai asked him with concern what had happened. Shin Mo cautiously suggested that she adopt a child in her free time. Young Hai immediately and vehemently opposed the idea. Just then, Son texted, asking his father to come over. Shin Mo reluctantly made an excuse to leave. He didn't return until the next day. Young Hai suddenly received a call from her husband's close friend. She learned that her husband had lied to her the previous night. Young Hai decided to sneak over to So Won's apartment to find them, and happened to see a courier delivering the DNA test results. Arriving at the apartment, she found no one there. The living room was a mess. A pair of children's socks lay on the table. Recalling seeing a child's shoes a few days prior, Young Hai wondered where the child had come from. Just then, So-won got a call. Hearing his mother's voice, his heart sank. D-1E5C, Mom, stop cleaning and come home quickly. When he heard his mother mention a DNA report, he urged her not to open it. But the more he insisted, the more curious Young Hai became. She couldn't resist and opened the envelope. Shin Mo, to protect Son, had put his own name on the paternity test, so the results showed him as the child's father. Young Hai nearly fainted when she saw the results. Just then, So-won arrived home. Seeing the results, he was shocked and told his mother not to misunderstand his father. At that moment, Shin Mo returned home carrying a sleeping Han-jol. Furious, Young Hai threw the report at her husband. Shin Mo was startled when he saw the results. Young Hai pointed at him accusingly. Shin Mo swore he hadn't done anything to betray his family, but with the evidence right in front of her, how could Young Hai believe him? As if on cue, Chun Ok and Yeonju arrived, adding fuel to the fire. Young Hai was convinced they were all in on the deception. In front of everyone, she demanded, "Whose child is Han-jol?" So-won immediately admitted Han-jol was his daughter, but Shin Mo claimed she was his younger sister. Hearing this, Young Hai was devastated and turned to leave. Ru-rai arrived home, and Young Hai recounted the whole story. Ru-rai was equally stunned. That evening, Shin Mo brought Han-jol home, holding roses, hoping his wife would forgive him and allow Han-jol to stay. He told Han-jol to give the flowers to her mother. Young Hai told them to take Han-jol to her room. Once Han-jol was gone, Young Hai showed no mercy to her husband. She couldn't understand why he was putting her through this. She grabbed her suitcase, intending to leave. Shin Mo rushed after her, trying to explain, but the more he explained, the worse it got. Young Hai angrily handed him divorce papers, but Shin Mo refused to accept them. Ru-rai couldn't take it anymore and burst out of her room. She told her father, "Young Hai is under so much stress that her illness keeps flaring up. Don't pressure her anymore." Suddenly, Young Hai collapsed in pain and lost consciousness. Father and daughter rushed her to the hospital. Ru-rai stayed by her mother's side until she woke up. Shin Mo told them to take Han-jol home while he stayed to take his wife for further examinations. The results indicated symptoms typical of an anger-related illness. The doctor recommended immediate treatment, warning of serious consequences if left untreated. Shin Mo hadn't realized how much pressure his wife was under, but due to his patriarchal mindset, he couldn't understand her suffering. Back home, he had dinner with Han-jol. When Han-jol spilled water on her clothes, he told her to change. Suddenly, Han-jol burst into tears. Ru-rai discovered a photo clutched in Han-jol's hand and heard her cry out, "This is my daddy." Ru-rai took the photo and confronted So-won. So-won admitted the child was his. Shin Mo had taken the blame out of fear that Chun Ok would find out. Ru-rai urged So-won to take responsibility. Otherwise, their parents would divorce. Moreover, Young Hai was in the hospital, deeply affected by the situation. With that, she took Han-jol to So-won's office, left the little girl with him, and walked away. After Young Hai was discharged, So-won brought Yeonju to his parents' house. Despite his father's objections, he knelt down, apologized to his mother, and confessed about the child to both his mother and his wife. Yeonju couldn't believe her husband's words. She asked, "Is that child out there really your daughter?" So-won could only offer a tearful apology. Married for 4 years, her husband had been distant. But now, he was admitting to having a child with his first love. The pent-up resentment within her erupted into fury. She slapped him hard across the face. Just then, Chun Ok arrived. Unable to enter her son-in-law's room, she asked the child to go out and call her father. Little Han-jol went inside and immediately grabbed So-won's hand. Shin Mo told So-won to take Han-jol outside so he could explain. So-won reluctantly complied. Chun Ok was surprised to see her son-in-law emerge. Thinking Han-jol was too young to understand, she didn't think much of it. So-won was about to confess to Chun Ok when she said, "I was in such a hurry that I forgot my medication. Son-in-law, could you pour me a glass of water?" Knowing Chun Ok had high blood pressure and had recently undergone heart surgery, So-won was afraid to upset her and remained silent. Fortunately, Yeonju intervened and coaxed her mother to leave. Once her mother was gone, Yeonju told So-won, "We absolutely cannot upset her anymore. If anything needs to be said, I'll do it. The next day, Shin Mo, hoping to win Yeonju over, invited her to So-won's office to discuss a strategy. Yeonju asked So-won, "Did you really not know you had a child?" So-won confessed that after breaking up with his first love, they hadn't seen each other again. Yeonju said, "If you loved her so much, why did you break up? You married me just 6 months later. Was it because you were after my family's wealth?" So-won admitted that had been his initial motivation. But he had grown to like Yeonju's cheerful and lively personality. Being with her brought him comfort and helped him forget the pain his first love had caused. Hearing this, Yeonju's heart ached even more. "In that case, I'm letting go." Hearing his wife say she wanted a divorce, So-won held her tightly. He eventually managed to soothe her. Shin Mo decided he would raise Han-jol, as long as they could keep it a secret from Chun Ok. To save her marriage, Yeonju agreed to compromise. However, So-won wanted to keep Han-jol with him. He would explain everything to Chun Ok. Yeonju worried her mother wouldn't be able to handle the shock, and she didn't want someone else raising her child. In the end, they couldn't agree on what to do about the child and left on bad terms. Young Hai took Han-jol shopping for new clothes and then visited Su-mai in prison. She asked Su-mai, "Why did you hide your pregnancy and give birth in secret?" Su-mai accused Shin Mo of looking down on her family background. He clearly hadn't loved her, yet he pretended to so they could get married. Su-mai, feeling wronged, used the child to seek justice. She believed she had done nothing wrong. Young Hai took out a photo of Han-jol taken that day. She told Su-mai that Han-jol was doing well and she didn't need to worry. However, she would miss out on Han-jol's childhood, which was perhaps the best punishment for her. Han-jol hadn't seen her father for days and would occasionally sneak a peek at his photo. Knowing the father-daughter bond couldn't be hidden, Young Hai decided to take Han-jol to see So-won. When they arrived at Chun Ok's charity shop, Han-jol refused to go inside, saying she would wait for her father. Finally, So-won arrived. Just moments before, she had been saying how much she missed him, but when he appeared, Han-jol shyly hid. So-won held out his hand. "Han-jol, come here." Han-jol happily took her father's hand. Yeonju arrived just in time to witness the scene. Seeing Yeonju, Han-jol pulled her hand away, making Yeonju even more uncomfortable. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet she felt like the villain. Worried her mother would discover Han-jol's presence, Yeonju asked her mother-in-law, "Do you really want us to get divorced?" Her mother-in-law understood Yeonju's frustration, but still hoped she could accept Han-jol. "Han-jol always wants to see her father. It breaks my heart to see it. So one can't abandon his own child. But you, how can you accept this?" Han-jol was overjoyed to see her father, but worried he would leave her. So-won knew Han-jol wanted to live with him. He hugged her and comforted her. "Not yet. Once things settle down here, I'll take you home." Han-jol nodded obediently and snuggled into So-won's embrace. Young Hai held a sleeping Han-jol in her arms. She hoped her son would regain his composure and take responsibility for both Yeonju and innocent Han-jol. Just then, Chun Ok arrived and invited them inside. The charity sale is about to end. Young Hai laid Han-jol down on the sofa to sleep. Chun Ok went to the storeroom to find clothes for a customer. Shin Mo arrived, furious, and started berating his mother-in-law. Worried Chun Ok would overhear, Young Hai told him to go outside to talk. So-won carried Han-jol out first. Unaware of the situation, Shin Mo blurted out everything. Overhearing, Chun Ok grew suspicious. After understanding the whole story, she was utterly shocked. She came out and questioned them. "What is going on?" Seeing Shin Mo still trying to lie, So-won and Yeonju entered. So-won confessed to Chun Ok that Han-jol was his daughter. Chun Ok, unable to bear the shock, closed her eyes and fainted. After fainting from anger, the first thing Chun Ok did upon waking was to decide her daughter and son-in-law should divorce to save So-won's marriage. Shin Mo pressured his wife into writing a guarantee to Chun Ok, promising to raise Han-jol himself. Though reluctant, his wife agreed for Han-jol's sake. Young Hai invited Chun Ok to her home and handed her the guarantee. Chun Ok questioned her mother-in-law's sincerity. To prove her commitment, Young Hai knelt before her, leaving Chun Ok slightly disconcerted. Young Hai pleaded with Chun Ok not to let So-won and Yeonju divorce. Han-jol was their grandchild, their blood. If no one else would care for her, Young Hai would, but Hanjol was so young and pitiful. Young Hai hoped Chun Ok would allow Hanjol to stay with So-won. Understanding her in-law's feelings, Chun Ok said she would consider it and left. Seeing Yeonju's distress, So-won gently draped his coat around her and urged her to go home. Yeonju suddenly felt a surge of bitter amusement. Married for 4 years, she had never felt So-won's love. Now, facing separation, he was suddenly kind. Was it pity she was receiving? So-won confessed he didn't want to lose her. Yeonju couldn't trust this belated affection. For Sun, she had been willing to sacrifice everything, swallowing all her resentment. But So-won seemed unable to confidently raise his child from his first love, yet also unable to bear the pain of losing Yeonju. Heartbroken for her daughter, Chun Ok spent the day refusing food and drink. Finally, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She took divorce papers to So-won. If Sun divorced, she would leave with nothing. If his parents raised Hanjol, Chun Ok would still unconditionally support him and give him time to think. 2 days later, Chun Ok met with her in-laws. So-won stated his position. He wanted to raise Hanjol but didn't want to divorce Yeonju. His solution was to move out with Yeonju. Both Chun Ok and Shin Mo opposed this. Shin Mo tried to reason with his seemingly foolish son, attempting to pull him aside for a talk about life's priorities. So-won pulled away, asking his father to respect his decision. Father and son clashed, neither willing to yield. Young Hai interrupted their argument. If So-won moved out, she would cut him off financially. She was certain her daughter, accustomed to a comfortable life, wouldn't follow him into hardship. Despite her in-law's pleas, Chun Ok left. Yeonju asked her mother-in-law to bring Hanjol to her home. She intended to try accepting Hanjol, but the reality of the situation proved incredibly difficult. She couldn't convince herself, lacked the confidence to raise the child, and felt even further from forming a mother-daughter bond. Seeing Hanjol only reminded her of her husband's first love. Young Hai held Yeonju's hand, gently comforting her, offering to raise Hanjol herself if necessary. Just then, Hanjol needed the bathroom. Yeonju took her, but Hanjol sensed her coldness. She touched Yeonju's face and asked if she hated her. Yeonju stared, stunned, as Hanjol apologized. At that moment, the nanny rushed in, announcing Chun Ok's return. Seeing her mother-in-law and recalling Sun's intention to move out with her daughter, Chun Ok assumed Young Hai was there to convince them to separate. Young Hai seethed inwardly. The presence of Hanjol only complicated matters, fearing her daughter would soften. Neither Yeonju nor Young Hai knew about Sun's impending departure. Back home, Young Hai argued with Shin Mo. He wanted So-won to give up Hanjol and maintain his affluent lifestyle with Yeonju. Young Hai insisted So-won was an adult and should decide for himself. Abandoning his child for his ex-wife would leave him with lifelong regret. Shin Mo retorted that if So-won was kicked out, he would hold his wife responsible. He planned to transfer Hanjol's household registration to his name, preventing his wife from further interference. Young Hai felt powerless against his unilateral decision. So-won started looking for a new job, solidifying his resolve to move out. Yeonju told So-won she couldn't leave her mother, just as he couldn't leave Hanjol. Chun Ok was nearly 70, had a heart condition, and required medication. Yeonju worried about her mother being alone and something happening. Furthermore, Chun Ok would cut them off financially, making their future precarious. So-won promised to work hard and provide a good life for them. He'd rather rent a small place and be free than live in a big house under Chun Ok's thumb. Tears streamed down Yeonju's face. She told So-won if he wanted to separate, they should just divorce. She ran out of the office, the elevator doors closing before So-won could catch her. He chased her to the parking lot. After 4 years of marriage, he finally opened his heart, sincerely pleading with her not to leave. His ex-girlfriend appeared, brazenly taunting Yeonju about being So-won's first love and flaunting their shared past. Facing her provocations, Yeonju asked if she knew why she'd sought her out. Yeonju was still uncertain about raising Soo-mai's child, yet Soo-mai showed no remorse. Yeonju hadn't even known who Soo-mai was, yet Soo-mai harbored such resentment. Upon mentioning Hanjol, Soo-mai's bravado crumbled. She tearfully begged Yeonju to help raise her daughter. Yeonju agreed, on one condition: Soo-mai must stay away from So-won and Hanjol, and never use Hanjol to entangle herself with So-won again. Soo-mai tearfully agreed. Yeonju still couldn't decide about Hanjol. Shin Mo claimed he had a solution. He instructed Yeonju to get an ultrasound picture, enlisting the help of friends. Returning home, Yeonju told her mother she was 4 weeks pregnant. Chun Ok, reeling from Yeonju's recent infertility diagnosis, was shocked. The news brought a mix of joy and confusion. Yeonju and So-won were supposed to finalize their divorce that day. Yeonju took it a step further, declaring she didn't want the child. Shin Mo quickly agreed to let Yeonju have the baby, promising he and Young Hae would raise it. He then feigned helplessness and left. As expected, Chun Ok stopped him, eager to discuss the matter further. Shin Mo inwardly celebrated, believing he had gained the upper hand. He recounted the events to his wife, praising his own cleverness. News of the pregnancy softened Chun Ok's heart. The nanny prepared a delicious meal for So-won and invited him home. However, the nanny noticed something amiss with the ultrasound picture. Having seen her own daughter's scans, she pointed out the fetus already had developed limbs, indicating it was at least 3 months old, not 4 weeks. Realizing the deception, Chun Ok scolded Yeonju. Unable to withstand the interrogation, Yeonju revealed Shin Mo's involvement. Furious, Chun Ok called movers and had So-won's belongings transferred to his parents' house. She told Yeonju to take a 2 or 3 month trip to Europe. She would renovate the house, giving Yeonju a fresh start upon her return. But Yeonju, in a gesture of contrition, offered to wash her mother's feet. Touched by this display of filial piety, Chun Ok softened. While washing her mother's feet, Yeonju burst into tears, confessing she would move in with So-won. Chun Ok couldn't accept this. Her daughter was choosing her husband over her. Yeonju, unable to face her mother, fled in tears. So-won, unable to reach her, rushed home. Learning of the fight, he embraced Yeonju, filled with remorse. His father told him to apologize to Chun Ok. So-won knew Chun Ok's mind was made up, and he had already secured a new job. But Shin Mo, oblivious to So-won's predicament, berated him for trading a watermelon for a sesame seed. When So-won arrived at the office, he found Chun Ok waiting. She pulled out an old photo of herself as a young woman with a little boy beside her son, Yoon-chu. Chun Ok confessed she'd never told anyone this story, but today, she wanted her son-in-law to know. At 15, Chun Ok's parents died, leaving her to raise her 3 younger siblings alone. Desperate, she was essentially sold to a wealthy family as a nanny. The young master, Yoon-chu, grew fond of her, and she worked tirelessly so her siblings could attend school. At 18, she became the wealthy man's second wife. After the marriage, her mother-in-law's cruel nature revealed itself. Not only did she forbid Chun Ok's siblings from attending school, but she also abused them over minor childhood squabbles. She even went so far as to give the younger children away to other families. Consumed by hatred for Yoon-chu and his family, Chun Ok abandoned him at a train station. He disappeared. Chun Ok lived with the guilt for years, an experience that shaped her aversion to raising other people's children and her fierce desire to protect her daughter from similar suffering. She pleaded with So-won to let Yeonju go. That same day, Shin Mo took Yeonju to see a rental house. Initially excited, Yeonju's hopes were dashed upon arrival. The house was not just small, it was filthy. Raised in luxury, Yeonju couldn't bear the thought of living there. Shin Mo, however, saw her as spoiled and weak. He left Yeonju at his family home, instructing her to learn housework from her mother-in-law, then abandoned her to her fate. So-won, heartbroken to see Yeonju struggling to adapt to such a drastic change in lifestyle, met her for dinner after work. Instead of comfort, he offered her their wedding ring and asked for a divorce. Yeonju was bewildered. She didn't understand why he wanted to separate. She could live without the mansion. All she wanted was to be with him. So-won insisted they were incompatible, delivering a string of hurtful words. He'd rather she hate him forever than resent him for the hardships she'd face by his side. After leaving, he immediately called Chun Ok, asking her to pick up Yeonju and take good care of her. He hung up, his heart aching. Chun Ok understood. Her son-in-law truly loved her daughter. So-won returned home and told his family about the divorce. They were shocked. Shin Mo accused him of self-sabotage. Meanwhile, Yeonju, devastated, turned to alcohol. She passed out drunk in a delivery truck, unresponsive even to her mother's pleas. Her drunken outbursts became so frequent that people avoided her. Exasperated, Yeonju's grandmother resorted to yelling "fire" to finally rouse her. As Chun Ok prepared to leave, she saw Shin Mo approaching. Truck knew why he was there. Despite his pleas to reconsider the divorce, she stood firm. She handed him a check, assuming So-won would need money to start over, urging him to accept it. To her surprise, Shin Mo, usually obsessed with money, refused. He declared that men should provide for women and asked Chun Ok to tell Yeonju to live well. Chun Ok saw Shin Mo in a new light. He gazed at the large house So-won had lived in, realizing his dream of wealth and social status was over. Returning home, he found his son waiting. To comfort So-won, Shin Mo lied, claiming Chun Ok had begged him to stop the divorce, but he had steadfastly refused. He wanted his son to move on. So-won understood his father's pain. Despite being stubborn and pragmatic, Shin Mo had dedicated his life to his son. The next day, Yeonju, dressed impeccably, appeared with her mother, radiating confidence. So-won arrived, equally dapper. Had anyone not known, they would have assumed they were attending a fashion show. Instead, it was their divorce appointment. Though still in love, they exchanged bitter words, each wishing the other would vanish from the face of the earth. So-won couldn't bear to look at Yeonju's proud back as she walked away. Yeonju, maintaining her facade of strength until he was out of sight, finally broke down. Witnessing her daughter's despair, Chun Ok comforted her, singing together to lift her spirits. But Yeonju knew the truth. The fleeting joy could only temporarily mask the deep sorrow in her heart. The next day, Yeonju set about erasing all traces of So-won. She burned their wedding photos and even tossed his vitamins into the flames. Just as she was about to throw his ring into the fire, Chun Ok rushed in and stopped her. She told her daughter that this was just treating the symptoms, not the cause, and that she had a plan to help Yeonju heal. Chun Ok had decided to open a clothing store for Yeonju, giving her something to focus on and keep her mind occupied. She brought Yeonju to see the potential storefront that day. Coincidentally, So-won's father, Shin Mo, was upstairs in the same building. He'd taken out a loan to open a clinic for So-won, refusing to let his son work for someone else. So-won spent his days busy with renovations and preparations. Later, while taking his daughter, Han-jol, out for a meal, So-won walked into the very restaurant where Yeonju and her mother were dining. The air thickened with awkwardness. So-won wanted to move, but Han-jol refused. Mid-meal, Han-jol suddenly burst into tears. Yeonju suspected she'd eaten something spicy. So-won rushed to buy milk, leaving Yeonju to comfort the child. She offered Han-jol a cucumber slice, but the little girl promptly vomited all over her. Yeonju took Han-jol to the restroom to clean up. Afterward, Han-jol hugged Yeonju and apologized. Unable to resist, Yeonju crouched down and asked about So-won's well-being. Learning that he hadn't been eating or sleeping well, Yeonju felt a pang of sadness. So-won returned, finding Han-jol gone. Chun Ok explained what had happened and thanked him. She expressed gratitude for his agreeing to the divorce and urged him to maintain his distance, allowing Yeonju to move on. Yeonju's clothing store opened soon after. Business was good, and she found a sense of fulfillment in her work. Her mother, hearing that a young doctor worked upstairs, suggested Yeonju take him some rice cakes as a friendly gesture, perhaps to spark a new romance. Yeonju firmly refused. So-won's mother, busy hiring staff for the clinic, couldn't watch Han-jol. The hungry child wandered downstairs. Spotting the rice cakes, her mouth watered. She snuck in and grabbed one, only to be caught by a server. Startled, she ran and bumped into Yeonju, who was carrying clothes. Surprised to see So-won's daughter, Yeonju asked where her father was. Han-jol tugged her hand, leading her to him. Just then, they encountered So-won, who was searching for his daughter. So-won told Han-jol to return to the clinic. Yeonju questioned why he was there. Upon learning he was the doctor upstairs, they began to argue again. At that moment, the elevator doors opened. So-won, recognizing the person inside, panicked and pulled Yeonju into the stairwell. Yeonju asked if he had ever truly loved her. He refused to answer, cruelly telling her to leave. Heartbroken, Yeonju called him a jerk. But looking at him, she felt even more pain. Meanwhile, Young Hai visited the restaurant where her daughter, Ru Rai, worked. Seeing Taeyong's enthusiastic welcome, she asked to see what her daughter did. Ru Rai was busy washing dishes in the kitchen, surrounded by bustling chefs. Suddenly, Jai Sim slipped and fell, blaming Ru Rai for not cleaning the floor properly. Ae Rai seized the opportunity to humiliate Ru Rai further. Apologizing profusely, Ru Rai cleaned up the spilled food with her bare hands. Witnessing this, Young Hai left the restaurant in tears. Ru Rai followed her to the parking lot and embraced her. Young Hai had believed her daughter was working on menu development, not as a kitchen maid. She couldn't bear to see her daughter suffer like this. Ru Rai explained that she wanted to change herself and asked for more time. She wanted to take responsibility for her choices. Young Hai could only ask Ti-Yang to take care of Ru Rai. Watching her mother drive away, heartbroken, Ru Rai vowed that next time, she wouldn't make her mother cry. After everyone left work, Ru Rai stayed behind in the kitchen alone, poring over the menu. She'd made quite a mess of the place. Just when she was feeling frustrated, Ti-Yang patiently corrected her mistakes. He told her that rushing led to errors and that she should trust herself and grow step by step. After a period of dedicated effort, Ru Rai finally stepped through the grand doors of the culinary world. Ti-Yang gifted her the first knife she had used. He promised to use this same knife to teach her how to cook. The next day, Calvin was coming to the restaurant for dinner. Ti-Yang and Ru Rai went to the market together to buy ingredients for the meal. When they returned to the parking lot, they found Calvin sitting in his car, looking quite unwell. Ti-Yang helped him into the office. Tired and feeling ill, Calvin asked Ti-Yang to get him some medicine. Calvin found a bottle of anti-alcohol medication. Just then, A.E. Rai entered the office, urging Ti-Yang to leave and instructing him not to mention this to anyone. The next day, Ti-Yang worked on new dishes in his office and, on a whim, made Calvin a light meal. Unfortunately, Jai Sim saw everything. He and A.E. Rai conspired to get rid of both Ti-Yang and Ru Rai. Early in the morning, they installed a camera in the office clock. Jai Sim immediately whispered the news to A.E. Rai. A.E. Rai, in turn, told Calvin that Ti-Yang was trying to take advantage of his illness to gain favor. Calvin didn't believe Ti-Yang was that kind of person. At that moment, someone delivered the breakfast Ti-Yang had prepared, adding fuel to the fire and making Calvin understandably upset. Calvin called Ti-Yang into his office and told him he hated being taken advantage of. He wanted Ti-Yang to focus on his work and not try to scheme for personal gain. Ti-Yang felt deeply wronged. He explained that his intentions were the same as in Bali, simply to provide food for those in need, and he hadn't expected Calvin to misunderstand him so completely. The next day, Myung Rang came to the company to report for duty. Starting that day, she would also be working in the development department. No one was happier about this than Ru Rai. Ti-Yang, struggling with a new dish, took Ru Rai to a restaurant for a taste test. They went to a place owned by an old friend of Ti-Yang's. Seeing their easy familiarity, Ru Rai became incredibly jealous. When she saw a sweet photo of the two of them on the wall, Ru Rai mistakenly assumed she was Ti-Yang's ex-girlfriend. She lost her appetite completely. Aware of Ru Rai's jealousy, Ti-Yang explained that they were just elementary school classmates and that he'd helped her manage the restaurant for a while. With the misunderstanding cleared up, they reconciled. After work, Ti-Yang and Ru Rai continued to work on a sauce. Calvin sought them out for tea and apologized for his earlier distrust. Ti-Yang graciously accepted his apology, saying he had already forgotten about it. After this incident, Calvin's trust in Ti-Yang grew even stronger. Every day after work, Ru Rai stayed late to diligently learn cooking techniques from Ti-Yang. Her culinary skills improved dramatically. A.E. Rai rushed to meet Calvin for dinner, but he told her he had another appointment. Curious, A.E. Rai followed him to the parking lot and saw Ti-Yang and Ru Rai getting into Calvin's car. Jealousy consumed her. Unable to come up with new culinary ideas, they arranged for Jai Sim to completely copy Ti-Yang's dishes. Calvin invited Ti-Yang and Ru Rai out to dinner. Noticing their close bond, he asked if they were dating. Ru Rai, not wanting to make their relationship public, denied it. However, when Calvin offered to set Ti-Yang up on a date, Ru Rai objected, confusing Calvin. Ti-Yang smoothed things over by saying he wanted to focus on his work. The three of them sat and talked for a long time. For the first time, Calvin opened up about his past. He hadn't touched alcohol in 17 years. His addiction had driven away the woman he loved, leaving him alone at his age. If he had had children, they would be Ti-Yang's age now. The atmosphere grew heavy with the sad story. Ti-Yang and Ru Rai comforted Calvin, encouraging him to confide in them whenever he felt burdened. The gathering ended with laughter. The new Christmas menu competition was about to begin. The pair busily prepared new dishes every day. Unbeknownst to them, their every move was being watched. A.E. Rai ordered Jai Sim to copy Ti-Yang's work directly for the submission the next day, assuring him she would take full responsibility if anything went wrong. The day of the menu competition arrived quickly. Just as Taeyong handed Ru Rai the plan, Myung Rang burst in. She showed them a menu identical to Taeyong's, both the main course and sides. It was Jai Sim's submission. Taeyong told Ru Rai to go to the meeting first. He wanted to find out what their opponent was up to. Ru Rai reluctantly agreed. Halfway through the menu presentations, the board members began murmuring. They realized Taeyong's and Jai Sim's menus were exactly the same. Jai Sim immediately accused them of stealing his new menu. Ru Rai insisted that she and Taeyong had stayed up all night working on it. Ae Rai sided with Jai Sim, producing a plan they had submitted the previous week, while Taeyong's had been submitted that morning. No matter how Ru Rai explained, no one listened. Taeyong and Myung Rang questioned the security guard and got a lead. Ae Rai and Jai Sim had been staying late recently, especially around the time Taeyong left work. They instantly realized who the real thieves were. They returned to the development room and drew the curtains. Sure enough, they saw a small red dot on the clock. Taeyong removed the device. Just then, Young Hyuk summoned him to the meeting room. Taeyong directly confronted Jai Sim. Jai Sim stubbornly denied everything. Only when Taeyong produced the camera and asked him to open his computer did the truth come out. Finally, unable to withstand everyone's gaze, Jai Sim admitted to copying Taeyong's idea, though he didn't reveal Ae Rai as the mastermind. Ultimately, Taeyong won the competition. Jai Sim had no choice but to leave. Assistant Kim gave Myung Rang a document and left as well. When they opened it, they discovered Ae Rai was the true culprit. Taeyong called Ae Rai to the stairwell and presented her with the evidence of her bullying Ru Rai, along with the evidence of her scheme. Ae Rai assumed he wanted money and tried to bribe him. Instead, Taeyong returned the evidence and told her to learn how to be a decent human being. He was letting her off this time out of respect for Calvin, but warned her there wouldn't be a second chance. Unexpectedly, Taeyong's leniency would cause him bigger problems later. Calvin had witnessed everything. He ordered Min Ho to call Ae Rai to his office, buy her a plane ticket, and tell her to leave. She was not to return without his express permission. Calvin detested such underhanded tactics. Although reluctant, Ae Rai didn't dare to protest. However, Min Ho suggested a collaboration between Ae Rai and Taeyong. He believed Calvin intended to make Taeyong his heir. Marrying his daughter would solidify his position. Only then did Calvin agree to give Ae Rai another chance. The next day, Calvin apologized to Taeyong on Ae Rai's behalf. The more he looked at Taeyong, the more he liked him. He also found Min Ho's suggestion feasible. He hoped Taeyong would mentor Ae Rai in cooking, creating opportunities for the two young people to interact. But Taeyong had no interest in Ae Rai. He said if she wanted to learn to cook, he could recommend someone better than himself. Assistant Kim, originally fired along with Jai Sim, was reinstated at Taeyong's request. That day, Taeyong officially became the team leader. Ae Rai apologized to Taeyong, then feigned remorse to Ru Rai. But everyone saw through her act. It was Taeyong and Ru Rai's one-year anniversary. Ru Rai poured her heart into a card. Before leaving work, she wanted to give it to Taeyong, hoping for a romantic evening. Unexpectedly, Taeyong said he had another appointment. As Ru Rai and Myung Rang left the company, they saw Taeyong and Ae Rai driving away together, crushing Ru Rai's heart. It turned out Calvin had asked Taeyong to teach Ae Rai to cook, forcing him to take her home. Everyone in Taeyong's family assumed Ae Rai was his girlfriend, but Taeyong left her with Youngdu and slipped away, remembering the special day. He had made reservations at the main restaurant. Ru Rai was overjoyed when she learned of Taeyong's arrangement. Unfortunately, a phone call from Ae Rai ruined everything. Ae Rai discovered Ru Rai was Taeyong's girlfriend. Shamelessly, she decided to steal him away. She cancelled her date with Taeyong. Ru Rai, hearing that Taeyong was with Ae Rai, flew into a rage and threw away the card she had intended to give him. By the time Taeyong arrived at the main store, she had already left, leaving behind only a crumpled card. He called Ru Rai, but she didn't answer. Finally, he found her downstairs. Ru Rai poured out all her frustrations. Taeyong took out the necklace he had specially designed for her. Facing her, he expressed his sincere feelings and then put the special necklace on her. At this moment, Ru Rai was immersed in happiness, forgetting all the unpleasantness she had just experienced. That afternoon, the company was holding a food tasting event for the chairman. This event was connected to the reputation of the menu development department. Taeyang arranged for Ru Rai to be in charge of purchasing the ingredients. The chairman's food tasting was about to begin, but everyone discovered that ingredients had only been prepared for 2 people. Ru Rai was certain she had ordered enough for 22. Taeyang called the supplier, but they couldn't help with such a last-minute order. Ae Rai immediately recommended a supplier she knew. Thanks to Ae Rai's timely rescue, the food tasting event was able to proceed smoothly. Everyone praised the food. The chairman complimented Taeyang, who was in charge of the cooking, even praising the sauce profusely. Ae Rai pulled Ru Rai over and introduced her to everyone, saying that she had personally made the sauce. Because of this, Ae Rai scored points with everyone. But later, she turned to Calvin and said she had mistakenly ordered the wrong ingredients, almost causing the tasting to be cancelled. Furthermore, Ae Rai deliberately added fuel to the fire, giving Calvin a bad impression of Ru Rai. But the next day, Ae Rai rushed into the meeting room, saying that the new menu flyers had the wrong country of origin printed on them. The phones of the restaurants were ringing off the hook with complaints. It just so happened that Taeyang was in charge of this matter. He had to go to the restaurants to collect the flyers and then take them to the printer to be reprinted. Myung Rang and assistant Kim also went to help. Ae Rai took advantage of the opportunity to be near Taeyang, deliberately wiping sweat from his forehead in front of their colleagues. Taeyang quickly dodged her. Before leaving work, Ae Rai overheard Taeyang calling Ru Rai. She intentionally spilled oil on the floor, using this ploy to ruin Taeyang and Ru Rai's date. Seeing Ae Rai fall, Taeyang had no choice but to take her home. Ae Rai then said she was hungry and asked Taeyang to cook for her. She took the opportunity to take pictures of him cooking. When Taeyang discovered this, Ae Rai looked at him with tearful eyes and confessed her feelings. Taeyang didn't know what to do. Ru Rai finished her work and returned to the office to wait for Taeyang. Myung Rang called and told her to check the vixen's social media. The photos, taken from a boyfriend's perspective and accompanied by affectionate captions, infuriated Ru Rai. When Taeyang arrived, Ru Rai immediately left. Last time, Taeyang giving Ae Rai a ride could be explained, but now he was cooking for her. Ru Rai couldn't stand it anymore. She believed her love had been misplaced, especially since the same person had stolen 2 of her boyfriends. Her pride was severely wounded. Seeing Ru Rai's anger, Taeyang wanted to make their relationship public. But Ru Rai said it wasn't necessary. If their love could only be stable with public acknowledgement, then it meant it was already shaky. The next day was supposed to be Ru Rai's official transfer date. She eagerly looked at the announcement list, but didn't see her name. Taeyang asked Min Ho about it. Min Ho said that because Ru Rai had made a serious mistake at work, her internship had been extended for another 3 months. If she still didn't meet the requirements, she would be fired. Ru Rai overheard this from outside the door, her heart sinking. Sitting alone by the elevator, she blamed herself, recalling how much effort and dedication she had put in. Ru Rai had longed for the official transfer, but it hadn't materialized. Myung Rang comforted Ru Rai, analyzing the situation for her. If this happened once, it could be an accident. But if it happened 2 or 3 times in a row, something wasn't right. They suspected someone was sabotaging her. Myung Rang immediately thought of Ae Rai. She had just seen the printing company employee meeting with Ae Rai downstairs. Ru Rai and Myung Rang went to find the printing company employee and successfully unearthed Ae Rai's scheme. Ru Rai laid it all out. Bribing the printing company employee and deliberately making mistakes was all to prevent her from becoming a full-time employee. Ae Rai stubbornly refused to admit her wrongdoing until Ru Rai presented the evidence. Truly frightened by the concrete proof, Ae Rai understood that Calvin would definitely not cover for her. But she still shamelessly claimed that she did it because she liked Taeyang. Moreover, Calvin also highly regarded Taeyang. Ae Rai could help Taeyang's career soar, while Ru Rai could only be a hindrance to him. She even threatened Ru Rai, telling her to stay away from Taeyang if she knew what was good for her. Having a friend like Myung Rang was a blessing. The 2 women vented their frustrations, feeling immensely relieved. Soon after, Taeyang received a text message from Ru Rai. The next day, Taeyang confronted Ae Rai with the evidence. But Ae Rai assumed Taeyang wanted to climb higher and even wanted to help him get rid of Ru Rai, the one who was in his way. However, Taeyang warned her not to target Ru Rai again. He would hand over the evidence to the company for disciplinary action. After a few days of the Cold War, Ru Rai had thoroughly considered everything. She didn't want it to end ambiguously and wanted to ask Taeyang directly if he truly loved her. When she arrived at the store, all the employees greeted her enthusiastically. It turned out Taeyang had prepared a surprise. He clearly explained the reason for his behavior the other day and confessed his sincere feelings in front of everyone. Then, he knelt down, took out a ring, and proposed. Ru Rai agreed without hesitation. After going through this trial, they understood each other's hearts better and strengthened their belief in their future together. Shin Mo, having just arrived at his daughter's company, saw her and Taeyang walking together. Without a word, he grabbed Taeyang by the collar, demanding to know why he was with his daughter. No matter how Ru Rai explained, Shin Mo refused to listen. At that critical moment, Myung Rang rushed in, hugged Taeyang, and lied, claiming he was her boyfriend. Thanks to her, he escaped a disaster. Watching Taeyang's retreating figure, Shin Mo grumbled. How can such a lousy man be so popular? During her lunch break, Ru Rai took her father on a tour of the workplace. Shin Mo was pleased with his daughter's work environment. This time, he had come to find her because Young Hai was asking for a divorce again. Ru Rai knew her mother was under a lot of pressure and advised her father to be more respectful and understanding. This was the first time the father and daughter had such a calm conversation. Watching Shin Mo's receding figure, Ru Rai felt a pang of sadness. She took his hand, offering to walk him to the parking lot. Unexpectedly, they ran into Taeyang there. Shin Mo assumed Taeyang was still clinging to his daughter. Just then, Calvin suddenly appeared, calling Taeyang's name. Shin Mo rushed forward and slapped Taeyang, questioning his relationship with his daughter. To his surprise, he heard Taeyang declare his love for Ru Rai. Shin Mo raised his hand again, but Calvin stopped him. Calvin stated that no one could cause trouble in his company. In fact, Calvin had recently received news that the son he had been searching for was Taeyang. How could he stand by and watch his son being bullied? Afterwards, security guards escorted Shin Mo out. He ordered Ru Rai to quit her job and break up with Taeyang. Helpless, Ru Rai had no choice but to go home with him. By the time Taeyang caught up, she had already left with her father. Back home, Shin Mo was furious and refused to speak to her. He demanded she call Young Hai and tell her to come home immediately. When everyone arrived, Shin Mo interrogated Ru Rai about how far her relationship with Taeyang had progressed. Ru Rai admitted she also loved Taeyang. In Shin Mo's eyes, Taeyang was a terrible person, yet his daughter was in love with him. Hadn't being cheated on by her ex-boyfriend been humiliating enough? But Ru Rai announced to her family her intention to marry Taeyang. For over 20 years, she had been suppressed by her strict father, which made her insecure and sensitive. It was Taeyang who helped her regain her confidence. Ru Rai thought her honesty would earn her family's support, but Shin Mo remained unmoved. At that moment, she understood her mother's despair. Ru Rai told her father that she would not only continue working at the company, but also continue seeing Taeyang. After saying this, she angrily ran to her room. Young Hai couldn't understand why her obedient daughter had suddenly changed. Ru Rai recounted the incident of her father causing a scene at the company. Now the whole company was buzzing with gossip, and she didn't know how to face her colleagues. Shin Mo barged in, saying that if she felt so ashamed, she could pack her bags and leave. Young Hai immediately told Ru Rai to pack, stating she would leave with her. Shin Mo was worried, but he told them to leave quickly. The next day, he specifically took half a day off to accompany his wife to the lawyer's office to sign the papers. Ultimately, a dispute arose over the division of assets. Shin Mo argued that he had earned every penny, and if his wife wanted a divorce, she should leave with nothing. Young Hai refused to back down, arguing that she had been with him for 34 years, bearing and raising children, cooking, cleaning, and taking care of all the household chores, which was no easy feat. Ru Rai and So Won thought their father was being unreasonable. How would Young Hai survive after the divorce? Shin Mo remained stubborn, insisting his wife had ruined the marriage and it was her fault. He wouldn't agree to anything other than her leaving empty-handed. Young Hai chased after him, leaning against his back, begging him to let her go. She was truly exhausted and didn't want to continue fighting. So Won and Ru Rai were heartbroken by this scene, but they had no right to interfere in their parents' marriage. That evening, their mother prepared a meal for the family, announcing she would be moving out the next day. So Won tried to persuade Young Hai to change her mind, but Shin Mo angrily threw down his chopsticks and stormed off to his room. He called his lawyer, scheduling a meeting for the following day and agreeing to sign the divorce agreement. The next day, Young Hai was packing her belongings. Suddenly, she saw a gift her husband had once given her. Memories of the past flooded back vividly. They had been together for 34 years, and there were too many ties between them. Although time had eroded their relationship and left them wounded, they had once made vows of eternal love. Perhaps, only those involved could truly understand their feelings. After careful consideration, Young Hai still chose to separate. Her only condition was that she take Ru Rai with her. Shin Mo agreed without hesitation. To drive her daughter-in-law away, the cruel mother-in-law conducted a secret investigation. She unexpectedly uncovered a shocking secret that had been hidden for 30 years. 30 years prior, her daughter-in-law had attempted murder overseas, subsequently changing her name and returning to the country to live. Now, she was married to her son. Sun Young presented the evidence to Ti Yang. The unexpected news left Ti Yang stunned, unable to believe his mother was capable of such a thing. Sun Young said, "If you don't believe me, go see HWA Young to confirm it." Ti Yang was unsure how to tell Ru Rai. Just then, Calvin happened to walk by and noticed him. He approached Ti Yang's car window, knocked on the glass, and worriedly asked if he was having any trouble. Ti Yang could only pretend nothing was wrong, then apologized to Calvin for the earlier incident. Having grown up without a father, Ti Yang was often bullied. The manipulative woman would stop at nothing to achieve her goals, even going so far as to orchestrate a car accident. While Ti Yang and Zundong were arguing in the parking garage, Young Hayek seized the opportunity to push Ti Yang to the ground. A car, lying in wait, sped towards him. The original plan was for Ae Rai to save Ti Yang at the critical moment, but she underestimated human selfishness. When the time came, Ae Rai couldn't bring herself to step forward. Calvin arrived at the garage and saw Ti Yang in danger. Without hesitation, he rushed forward and pushed Ti Yang out of the way. After being hit by the car, Calvin immediately lost consciousness. Calvin's appearance was completely unexpected. Ti Yang quickly took Calvin to the hospital. But the mastermind blamed Ti Yang. If it weren't for Calvin wanting you as his son-in-law, he wouldn't have risked his life to save you. This made Ti Yang feel even more guilty. Min Ho, who had worked for Calvin for 15 years, felt compassion. After careful consideration, he called HWA Young to inform her. Ru Rai and her colleagues rushed to the hospital. Learning that Calvin was seriously injured and in a coma after saving Ti Yang wanted to stay at the hospital. They had to return home without him. Myung Rang was suspicious about why Calvin would risk his life for Ti Yang. Just a few days prior, he had almost fought with Shin Mo because of Ti Yang. They were convinced that Calvin truly considered Ti Yang as a son-in-law and couldn't help but sigh over Ru Rai's complicated love life. Their conversation was overheard by HWA Young, but she didn't dare approach the operating room. She sent Min Ho to inquire about Calvin's condition. Min Ho explained that Calvin was in critical condition, and he hoped she would be honest about the relationship between Ti Yang and Calvin, at least allowing Calvin to see his son. The following day, Ti Yang returned home to get some clothes. HWA Young took the initiative to tell him that Calvin was his biological father. Although he had imagined having a father like Calvin, when the truth was finally revealed, a wave of emotions overwhelmed Ti Yang, leaving him speechless. Upon seeing Ru Rai, he embraced her tightly, and his heart gradually calmed down. Back at the hospital, watching Calvin sleep soundly, Ti Yang recalled his childhood admiration for children who had fathers. He'd always been curious about what it felt like to hold a father's hand. Now, holding his father's hand, he realized that all the hatred he'd harbored vanished in that moment. Ti Yang only wished Calvin would wake up soon. But Ae Rai hoped Calvin would never regain consciousness. She had transferred all the company shares to herself. If Calvin died, the contract would take effect immediately. While Ti Yang went downstairs to meet his mother, she arranged for Young Hayek to sneak into the hospital room, disconnect Calvin's ventilator, and quickly leave. By the time Ti Yang returned to the room with his mother, the doctors were frantically working on Calvin. HWA Young cried out, "Calvin, open your eyes, I brought your son to you." Ti Yang also pleaded in agony for his father to wake up. Perhaps hearing their voices, a single tear silently rolled down Calvin's cheek. His heartbeat gradually returned to normal. Miraculously, Calvin opened his eyes. HWA Young pulled her son to Calvin's side. Facing each other as father and son for the first time gave Calvin a newfound strength. Ae Rai gritted her teeth in frustration, her plot foiled. She quickly devised another plan. using T-Young's family to drive a wedge between him and Ru Rai. HWA Young received a call from Min Ho, saying he needed to discuss something about T-Young. Young Hyuk kept watch outside the hospital room. When HWA Young left, he immediately informed Ae Rai. She followed Ru Rai into the elevator and, seizing the opportunity, provoked her with harsh words before snatching a gift from Ru Rai's hands and stomping on it. As expected, Ru Rai flew into a rage, grabbing Ae Rai's collar and demanding, "Why did you do that?" Just then, the elevator doors slowly opened. HWA Young stood there, witnessing the entire scene. Ae Rai immediately put on a pitiful act, specifically for HWA Young's benefit. Having met Ae Rai before, HWA Young naturally took her side. Then, Min Ho proceeded to brainwash HWA Young, portraying Ae Rai as an angelically kind person. He fabricated stories, claiming Ru Rai was an ambitious woman. Shin Mo's disruption at the company was also twisted to imply a lack of proper upbringing. He then showed HWA Young pictures of T-Young and Ru Rai. HWA Young realized the girl in the photos was the same one she'd seen in the elevator. She developed a complete aversion to Ru Rai. In contrast, seeing Ae Rai praying devoutly for Calvin every day, HWA Young was delighted, believing Ae Rai was the ideal daughter-in-law. Ru Rai visited Calvin at the hospital, apologizing for Shin Mo's disruptive behavior at the company. Calvin, being a father himself, understood her feelings. But when T-Young mentioned wanting to marry Ru Rai, Calvin suddenly claimed he was tired and needed to rest. Clearly, Calvin disapproved of their marriage. T-Young comforted Ru Rai, telling her not to be upset. But facing disapproval from both families, how far could their relationship go? A nurse carefully reminded the patient's family that a few days prior, someone had disconnected his father's ventilator. At the time, the patient was in a coma, ruling out the possibility of him removing it himself. She urged the family to be vigilant during their overnight watch. When T-Young returned to the hospital room, he discovered a masked man attempting to harm Calvin. T-Young rushed forward to catch him in the act, but the man pushed him down and fled the room. T-Young immediately gave chase, but by the time he reached the parking lot, the man had vanished. However, the man was merely hiding behind a car, waiting for T-Young to leave before quietly slipping away. Ae Rai and two others were discussing Calvin's will. Calvin was scheduled to be discharged the following week and would undoubtedly review it. They feared Ae Rai's alterations to the will would be discovered. Min Ho reassured Ae Rai, explaining he had bribed the lawyer. The will could be restored to its original state next week. At that moment, Min Ho received a call from T-Young, who said there was an urgent matter requiring his presence at the hospital. As the most trusted person by Calvin's side, T-Young wanted to ask Min Ho if Calvin had any enemies. T-Young also mentioned the incident with the disconnected ventilator. Hearing there were no eyewitnesses, Min Ho breathed a sigh of relief. T-Young then revealed that he had just seen a man in black clothing in the hospital room and intended to report the incident to the police. Min Ho immediately intervened, using the excuse that news of Calvin's condition couldn't be made public. He promised T-Young he would investigate discreetly. After this incident, T-Young didn't dare leave the hospital room. Everyone admired Calvin's fame and status, but they didn't realize he couldn't even sleep peacefully and relied on sleeping pills. T-Young resolved to stay by Calvin's side, ensuring he wouldn't feel lonely or afraid again. The next day, worried about Calvin's safety, T-Young was distracted at work. Ru Rai, concerned, inquired about Calvin's condition. T-Young told her about the danger Calvin was in and that he needed to check the hospital's surveillance footage. However, upon arriving at the security room, he discovered the previous day's recordings had been erased. The staff explained the hospital deleted data weekly. T-Young asked if the police could recover the footage. The staff confirmed this was possible, but Min Ho immediately stopped T-Young from contacting the police, suggesting they review the previous night's footage first. Although the masked man's face wasn't visible, the license plate number shocked T-Young, and he decided against calling the police. Back home, T-Young confronted Young-do directly, asking if he had been in Calvin's room the previous night. Young-do denied it, but his injured hand was the most compelling evidence. T-Young recognized it as an injury sustained during their altercation. Seeing he couldn't hide the truth any longer, Young-do confessed. After Calvin's injury, T-Young's mother had been visiting the hospital daily. During this time, they frequently argued about the situation, ultimately leading to their breakup. Young-do harbored resentment towards Calvin, believing his appearance had ruined their family. Taeyang asked if Youngdu had disconnected the ventilator a few days prior. Youngdu recklessly took the blame. After calming down, Youngdu confessed to Taeyang that he'd been in a terrible state of mind lately. He didn't even understand why he'd done it, only hoping Taeyang and his mother wouldn't leave him. Taeyang's mother, caring for Calvin daily at the hospital, also treated Youngdu with kindness. This led Calvin to believe Ae Rai had genuinely changed. He still hoped Ae Rai and Taeyang would marry. Taeyang's mother also disapproved of her son's relationship with Ru Rai. She recounted the elevator incident to Calvin, further fueling their dislike for Ru Rai. Min Ho seized the opportunity, presenting Calvin with a document. He had recently investigated Ru Rai's family background and discovered Shin Mo had forced Su Mai to have an abortion years ago, only to later allow his son to marry into a wealthy family. Taeyang's mother and Calvin grew even more apprehensive. Shin Mo had previously attacked Taeyang in the parking lot, likely due to looking down on his family background. Believing Ae Rai and Ru Rai had spent time together, Calvin wanted to learn more about Ru Rai through Ae Rai. Predictably, Ae Rai only further slandered Ru Rai, portraying her as a manipulative woman, successfully swaying Hwa Young and Calvin to her side. They comforted Ae Rai, assuring her they would help persuade Taeyang. Taeyang's mother and Calvin visited Su Mai in prison for confirmation. At the mention of Shin Mo's name, Su Mai expressed intense hatred, claiming he had ruined her life. She even retorted that she had endured 10 months of pregnancy and childbirth only to have her child stolen from her. Su Mai further fabricated a story about their daughter-in-law being unable to conceive, leading them to scheme and have her act as a surrogate. They had ostensibly told her to have an abortion, but then shamelessly claimed the child after it was born. Witnessing Su Mai's apparent genuine hatred, Taeyang's mother and Calvin fully believed her. They worried Taeyang would suffer the same fate as Su Mai. Unbeknownst to them, all of this had been orchestrated by Min Ho, who had secretly made a deal with Su Mai. As the saying goes, every villain is the hero of their own story. Do you still consider Su Mai to be the victim now? Don't think that being a homemaker is all leisure and relaxation. Only after experiencing it yourself do you realize how many difficulties there are. Ever since his wife, Young Hai, started working outside the home, all the household chores fell onto Shin Mo's shoulders. Retired, he now had to wake up early every morning to make breakfast for his children and grandchildren, even going so far as to wake up his son. The toast he made was darker than Judge Bao's face. He also had to tie his granddaughter Hanjol's hair and coax her to go to kindergarten. By the time Shin Mo found a shirt for his son, the eggs and ham in the kitchen were burnt beyond recognition. His son, seeing this, advised him to hire a housekeeper. But Shin Mo, unwilling to spend the money, insisted he could manage just as well as Young Hai. After his children and grandchild left, Shin Mo started cleaning. After 34 years of marriage, he had never even scrubbed a toilet, didn't know how to use the washing machine, and didn't even know where the detergent was kept. In the afternoon, Shin Mo picked up Hanjol from kindergarten and had to go grocery shopping. He painstakingly cooked dinner for his granddaughter, only for her to complain that his cooking was terrible and she'd rather eat snacks. Angrily, Shin Mo snatched Hanjol's snacks. Hanjol started crying and asked for her grandmother. Defeated, Shin Mo took his granddaughter out. By chance, Shin Mo saw a man dropping his wife off at home. Seeing their friendly interaction, he immediately flew into a jealous rage. He stormed over to the car, grabbed the man by the collar, and demanded to know why he was hugging his wife. Young Hai explained that it was a misunderstanding. Her boss had just helped her with a stuck seatbelt. But blinded by jealousy, Shin Mo assumed it was an excuse. The boss, resigned, let him sit in the car and fastened his seatbelt. Shin Mo realized he had truly misunderstood his wife. The boss came over, unbuckled his seatbelt, and teased, "Does that count as a hug?" Shin Mo, feeling guilty, was speechless. It turned out that Young Hai had been on a business trip with her boss that day, successfully signing a contract with a major client, and her boss had given her a ride home. After the boss left, Young Hai, unable to contain herself, exploded, feeling that Shin Mo had completely embarrassed her. Shin Mo finally began to reflect. The man had been polite and considerate towards his wife, unlike him, who was always irritable. This made him truly feel a sense of crisis. That evening, Ru Rai, Shin Mo, and Young Hai's daughter suggested to Young Hai that she wanted to formally introduce Taeyang, her boyfriend, to the family on Shin Mo's birthday. Upon hearing this, Young Hai was so startled she sat straight up. She was certain the family would be in an uproar. Ru Rai said she had a plan and only hoped Young Hai could help her persuade Shin Mo. On Shin Mo's birthday, Young Hai deliberately took him to the restaurant where Ru Rai worked. Myung Rang, another daughter, enthusiastically welcomed her parents and served them dishes Ru Rai had prepared. After tasting his daughter's cooking, Shin Mo couldn't help but praise her. His silly daughter actually had decent cooking skills. It was the best meal he'd ever had. Ru Rai, having never received such praise from Shin Mo, was deeply moved to tears. Then, she told Shin Mo that she wanted to introduce someone to him. At that moment, Ti Yang walked over with a cake. Upon seeing Ti Yang, the smile on Shin Mo's face instantly vanished. He accused them of conspiring against him and warned Ti Yang to stay away. He absolutely would not let him work in their company. Ti Yang chased Shin Mo to the parking lot to explain. But Shin Mo refused to listen. Even when Ti Yang knelt down, he remained unmoved. Young Hai, unable to bear it any longer, pulled Ti Yang up and said, "Shin Mo is stubborn. Once he's made up his mind, 10 oxen can't pull him back." Young Hai fully supported Ru Rai and Ti Yang's relationship. Although she didn't know Ti Yang well, he had made her insecure daughter confident. This reason alone was enough for him to become her son-in-law. She told Ti Yang to ignore Shin Mo and to set a wedding date and let her know. Shin Mo was heartbroken by his wife's actions and went out to drink alone. By the time Ru Rai and Ti Yang arrived, he was completely drunk. Ti Yang helped Ru Rai take Shin Mo home. In the middle of the night, Shin Mo woke up and went downstairs for a glass of water, only to find someone sleeping on the dining table. He thought it was his son, So-won, but unexpectedly, it was Ti Yang. Without a word, Shin Mo told Ti Yang to leave. Just then, So-won arrived home from work. Ti Yang greeted son and his father before leaving, but not before leaving a letter for Shin Mo. In the letter, Ti Yang explained how he met Ru Rai, his circumstances at the time, and his feelings. He also hoped Shin Mo would give him another chance. Ti Yang had even made him a bowl of hangover soup. This thoughtful gesture deeply moved Shin Mo. He immediately ordered Sun to call Ti Yang back. Sun called the security guard downstairs, who managed to stop Ti Yang just as he was exiting the elevator. Ti Yang went to see Young Hai and Ru Rai that night, sharing the good news with them. It turned out that Shin Mo had called Ti Yang back upstairs. Although his words were unforgiving, he had accepted Ti Yang in his heart. However, for his daughter's future, he made Ti Yang sign a sort of selling himself into servitude contract in front of him. So-won was astonished by his father's actions. Unexpectedly, Ti Yang didn't complain but obediently complied with all of Shin Mo's demands. Ru Rai and Young Hai were overjoyed. Ti Yang had won over Ru Rai's father with his sincerity, but winning over Ti Yang's parents wouldn't be so easy. Shin Mo, after a lifetime of guessing, finally learned to respect his daughter's choices. He agreed to Ru Rai and Ti Yang's marriage, even discussing with his wife about holding the wedding soon. He immediately called Ti Yang to set up a meeting. Shin Mo arrived at Ti Yang's office just in time to hear Calvin, Ti Yang's father, expressing his disapproval of the marriage. Enraged, Shin Mo was about to argue with Calvin. Ru Rai, learning that her father was at the company, rushed over. Shin Mo argued that although Calvin was the boss, he had no right to interfere in his employees' personal lives. However, Calvin sarcastically retorted that Shin Mo was being disingenuous. Didn't he already know that Calvin was Ti Yang's father? Wasn't he eager to marry off his daughter because he saw how well off Ti Yang's family was? Shin Mo was stunned by Calvin's words. Ti Yang chased after Calvin to the parking lot, explaining that Shin Mo had no idea that Calvin was his father. Shin Mo's approval of their marriage wasn't because of their wealth, but because of who Ti Yang was as a person. But Calvin remained fixed in his belief, arguing that Shin Mo had previously hit Ti Yang and his sudden change of heart was surely suspicious. Ti Yang followed Calvin home, unknowingly alerted by Young Hayek to Ae Rai, Calvin's preferred match for Ti Yang. As soon as Calvin arrived, Ae Rai tried to ingratiate herself with him. She pretended to be understanding, telling Calvin not to force Ti Yang to marry her, lest it damage their father-son relationship. At that moment, Ti Yang overheard their conversation from outside the door. Seeing Ti Yang's unwavering stance, Calvin absolutely refused to allow his son to marry Ru Rai. He believed Shin Mo was opportunistic, and Ru Rai, despite her gentle appearance, was manipulative. Calvin didn't want someone like that with Ti Yang for life. No matter how Ti Yang tried to explain, Calvin wouldn't listen. He decided to tell Ti Yang about Ae Rai's mother. Ae Rai pretended to leave but eavesdropped outside the door. Calvin recounted how, during a period of career failure, he drank heavily every day. Eventually, his health deteriorated, and he was hospitalized. Ae Rai's mother, a nurse, helped him overcome his alcoholism. She stayed by his side during his darkest times, helping him achieve the success he had today. Before she passed away, she asked him to take good care of Ae Rai. Now, Ae Rai was genuinely in love with Ti Yang, so he hoped Ti Yang would marry her. The following day, Calvin summoned Ru Rai to his office. He accused her and her father of being deceitful and greedy, uttering hurtful words that deeply wounded Ru Rai. He then offered her a chain of stores in exchange for her agreement to sever all ties with Ti Yang. Shin Mo, intending to meet with Calvin, overheard the conversation from outside the door. Furious, he threw down the fruit he was carrying and stormed in. He grabbed the contract from the desk, glanced at it, and threw it down forcefully. He directly confronted Calvin, telling him not to think that just because his son was precious, he could trample on his daughter's self-respect. Even if Calvin agreed now, Shin Mo declared he would absolutely not accept the marriage. Ru Rai was equally displeased with Calvin's behavior. She stated that while her family wasn't wealthy, they had never intended to be parasitic or harm anyone. Why, she demanded, should her father be subjected to such humiliation? If Ti Yang's status as Calvin's son justified trampling on genuine feelings, then even though she had once wanted to marry him, she would now abandon the relationship. With that, she decisively pulled her father from the office. The two rode the elevator in silence. Ru Rai knew her father was suppressing his anger, so she squeezed his hand and apologized. Shin Mo, understanding his daughter's distress, patiently comforted her and praised her for being just like her mother, beautiful and kind. He declared that losing such a good daughter-in-law was their loss. Shin Mo's protection and comfort warmed Ru Rai's heart. Shin Mo told his daughter to wait while he fetched the car. Ti Yang caught up, asking what had happened. Ru Rai, unwilling to rehash the events and risk Calvin thinking she was speaking ill of him behind his back, simply said that she loved her current job but would not be returning after today. Furthermore, she would not see Ti Yang again. Despite Ti Yang's pleas, Ru Rai remained unmoved. She didn't look back as she left with her father. Ti Yang questioned Min Ho about what transpired. Min Ho revealed that Calvin had refused to approve their marriage, likely having discovered a major issue with Ru Rai's family. After work, Ti Yang confronted Calvin. Calvin presented him with a recording the conversation between himself and Su Mai in prison. Ti Yang argued that conclusions couldn't be drawn based solely on a recording. However, Calvin remained adamant, a bad parent begets a bad child. Therefore, he forbade Ti Yang from continuing his relationship with Ru Rai. Ti Yang was unsure of the truth behind the information Calvin possessed and how to deal with the situation. Meanwhile, Yu Chu suddenly felt weak and faint. Young Hai, noticing this, rushed to help him home. Unexpectedly, Yu Chu turned out to be Ti Yang's younger brother. Hearing of Yu Chu's illness, the whole family came to check on him. Yongdu and his sister helped him to rest. The two mothers met for the first time, and Hwa Young had a very favorable impression of Young Hai. She had heard her son often praise Young Hai in front of others, treating Yu Chu very well, like family. Hwa Young thanked Young Hai for taking her son to the hospital and bringing him home. The two chatted pleasantly, even making plans for afternoon tea together in the future. That day, Hwa Young visited the store, bringing dumplings as a thank you gift for Young Hai's care of her son. As the two women chatted cheerfully, Hwa Young spotted Ru Rai. The smile on her face instantly vanished. She remembered the girl who had bullied Ae Rai in the elevator. After Ru Rai left, she asked Young Hai, "Who was that girl?" Young Hai replied, "That's my daughter. She's helping me out at the store today." Hwa Young's smile didn't return. To verify the truth, Ti Yang sought out Shin Mo. Coincidentally, Ru Rai's aunt had just returned from abroad. Ti Yang played Su Mai's recording. Shin Mo, unwilling to revisit Su Mai's past, angrily retreated to his room after listening. Ru Rai's aunt assured Ti Yang that she understood her brother. Shin Mo would never do such a thing. She urged Ti Yang not to be blinded by lies. Meanwhile, Min Ho used the pretext of Ti Yang's impending inheritance to persuade Calvin to allow him to study abroad. However, Calvin was reluctant to be separated from his son. In reality, Min Ho and Ae Rai planned to send Ti Yang abroad to separate him from Ru Rai. They would then send Ae Rai overseas after him, believing that feelings would develop more easily in a foreign land. Ae Rai grew increasingly anxious about the possibility of Taeyang and Ru Rai reconciling. She feared Taeyang would eventually discover the fabricated evidence she had created. Therefore, she immediately approached Hwa Young, hoping she could persuade Taeyang to study abroad. She then skillfully changed the subject to divert attention. After listening, Hwa Young readily agreed. That evening, she visited the store to speak with Ru Rai. Ru Rai, understanding Hwa Young's intentions, promised she would not see Taeyang again. Her pride wouldn't allow her family to be subjected to prejudice. Hearing this, Hwa Young felt reassured. However, just as she reached the door, she saw Taeyang. Hwa Young assumed Ru Rai was being two-faced, having just promised not to see him, and now rushing to meet him. Taeyang, worried that Hwa Young would give Ru Rai a hard time, urged his mother to go home. They left together without speaking. Downstairs, Taeyang was reluctant to part with Ru Rai. But Ru Rai, unwilling to cause further difficulties for their parents, told Taeyang not to seek her out anymore. Taeyang pulled her into a hug and apologized. Ru Rai said, "Continuing like this will only cause us both more pain." Regardless, Taeyang refused to give up. He told Ru Rai to wait for him to resolve the situation. The next day, Hwa Young, learning that Yu Chu was working, rushed to the store and demanded he quit and return home. Yu Chu, enjoying his job, refused. Hwa Young recounted Ru Rai's story to her son, unwilling to have him associate with someone she deemed no good. Unexpectedly, Youngdu and Young Hai were standing behind them, causing the atmosphere to become tense. After listening, a displeased Young Hai asked Hwa Young, "Do you have any proof?" Yesterday they called each other sisters. Today they argued fiercely. Standing her ground as a mother, Hwa Young defended her son. But when she mentioned Ru Rai nearly endangering someone abroad, almost drowning Ae Rai, and ruining Ae Rai's engagement, Ru Rai was stunned. Only after they left did she suddenly understand. Ae Rai had deliberately provoked her in the elevator to put on a show for Hwa Young, creating a negative first impression. Thus, everything became clear. Ru Rai recounted the entire story to Young Hai, explaining that Ae Rai was behind everything. She intended to ask Yu Chu to call Hwa Young and clear up the misunderstanding, but Hwa Young refused to hear a word from her. Youngdu believed Hwa Young was being too stubborn, refusing to calmly listen to Ru Rai. He also noticed several suspicious aspects of Ae Rai's behavior. Even their daughter, Yoon Byul, had picked up on it. Yoon Byul showed her mother an old photo of Calvin. Earlier, she had shown the photo to Ae Rai, who claimed not to know the man in the picture. It was likely that she already knew Taeyang's true identity at that time. That evening, Ae Rai visited the family. Once again, she asked Hwa Young to persuade Taeyang to go abroad. She even claimed that Calvin had agreed. Youngdu pulled out a photo of Calvin and asked Ae Rai, "Do you know this person?" Ae Rai's expression immediately changed upon seeing the photo. Knowing that Taeyang's family was testing her, she pretended to see the photo for the first time. She even said, "This person looks like Calvin when he was younger." Hwa Young instantly realized Ae Rai was lying. Ae Rai also noticed Hwa Young's suspicion. Next, she took a drastic step to harm her rival. She recklessly threw herself down the stairs from the 28th floor. Fortunately, Taeyang intervened in time, preventing her from getting hurt. However, Ae Rai achieved her goal. She did it so Calvin would witness it firsthand, further fueling his dislike for Ru Rai. As expected, Calvin glared at Ru Rai angrily. Earlier, Min Ho had informed Ae Rai that Hwa Young and Calvin had met with Young Hai's father to clear up the misunderstanding about Su Mai. Just as the parents had reconciled, Ae Rai deliberately used this bitter trick to soften Calvin's heart. Calvin had just cleared up the misunderstanding with Ru Rai, but now he witnessed this incident. No matter how Ru Rai explained, Calvin refused to listen. Taeyang resolutely defended Ru Rai, but Ae Rai had orchestrated everything. The witnesses all claimed that Ru Rai had pushed Ae Rai. Now, even if Ru Rai jumped into the Yellow River, she couldn't wash away the accusations. Taeyang's only option was to present evidence to Calvin. He said, "Take a look for yourself, uncle, and you'll understand." With that, he pulled Ru Rai out of the office. Back home, Ru Rai recounted the incident to Young Hai. Now, even Calvin believed Ae Rai. It would be even harder for her to win against him. Young Hai asked about Taeyong's attitude. Ru Rai said that if Calvin continued to believe Ae Rai, Taeyong would sever ties with him. But that wasn't the outcome she desired. If their father-son relationship fractured because of her, it would be difficult for them to be happy even if they got married. Young Hai wanted her daughter to settle things with Ae Rai once and for all. But Ru Rai feared Ae Rai's cunning and resourcefulness. She was no match for her. Young Hai advised her daughter, if she chose Taeyong, she had to give it her all, so she wouldn't have any regrets later. Calvin reviewed the evidence of Ae Rai bullying Ru Rai. If Ae Rai truly did those things, he absolutely wouldn't tolerate it. But Min Ho still pleaded for Ae Rai. He told Calvin that the documents weren't necessarily true. Ae Rai and Ru Rai were just engaging in healthy competition at work. He even claimed that Ru Rai had instructed others to speak ill of Ae Rai behind her back. Taeyong asked Calvin what he thought after reviewing the evidence. Calvin said he believed his daughter more than the documents. Upon hearing this, Taeyong immediately submitted his resignation, believing there was no longer any need to follow Calvin. Calvin stated that leaving meant forfeiting his inheritance. But Taeyong didn't care about inheriting the family fortune. He left the office without looking back. Calvin, on the other hand, was so furious he nearly fainted. Ru Rai followed her mother's advice and went to Ae Rai's hospital room. Seeing Ru Rai, Ae Rai tried to send her away. But today, Ru Rai was prepared. She goaded Ae Rai into revealing her true intentions and recorded their entire conversation. Suddenly, Taeyang called. Ae Rai noticed Ru Rai's phone. They struggled over the phone, causing it to drop to the floor. At that moment, Calvin arrived to visit Ae Rai. She pretended to be bullied, prompting Calvin to immediately send Ru Rai away. Ru Rai begged Calvin to listen to the recording before she left. Calvin took the phone and listened to the conversation. "I'm not interested in Chef Taeyang, I'm interested in the fact that Taeyong will inherit this company." After listening to the recording, Calvin calmly told everyone to leave. Once they were gone, he instructed Min Ho to wait outside as well. Calvin was deeply disappointed in Ae Rai's actions. He questioned her about her motives. But Ae Rai didn't acknowledge her wrongdoing. She complained that Calvin's favoritism had led her down this path. Since Taeyong's arrival, he had always protected him. Initially, she just wanted Taeyong gone. But after learning he was Calvin's son, she wanted to win him back. She didn't want to end up like her mother by Calvin's side for years, but with nothing to show for it. Taeyong, having learned that Ru Rai went to see Ae Rai, rushed over. They ran into each other in the parking lot. With the major obstacle of Ae Rai resolved, they no longer held back and ran to each other's embrace. Understanding that everything had been orchestrated by Ae Rai, Calvin realized he had not only misunderstood Ru Rai, but had also wronged Taeyong. Unable to reach Taeyong, he called Ru Rai, hoping she could arrange a meeting between him and his son. A few days later, Calvin visited the hospital again. Although Ae Rai's actions had deeply disappointed him, she was still the child he had watched grow up. He hoped that in the future, Ae Rai would live an honest life and not resort to any means to harm others. Even though she was his daughter, he firmly refused to let Ae Rai stay by his side any longer. Believing Calvin had lost all hope in her, Ae Rai planned to destroy everything and move abroad to live a carefree life. However, Min Ho wouldn't let her go, pressuring her to retain Calvin's affection at all costs. He also knew Calvin's weaknesses. The woman gritted her teeth, glared at a framed photo on the wall, ripped it down, and tore it to shreds. Then, she slowly picked up a glass of wine from the table. Shortly after, Calvin received a call from Min Ho. He claimed that Ae Rai had suddenly disappeared from the hospital. Earlier, Calvin had arranged to meet with Taeyong and Ru Rai to mend their relationship. Unexpectedly, just as father and son reconciled, Ae Rai caused another incident. Calvin had no choice but to rush off to find her. When Calvin arrived at Ae Rai's apartment building, Min Ho suggested that Ae Rai might be in danger. He then showed Calvin a picture of Ae Rai and Michu. On the back was a message saying she was going to find her deceased mother. Calvin and Min Ho hurried to Ae Rai's apartment. Upon entering, they found the place in disarray, with Ae Rai lying motionless on the sofa. Calvin anxiously rushed to his daughter's side. But Min Ho picked up a small medicine bottle from the floor and told Calvin that Ae Rai might have ingested the pills. They rushed Ae Rai to the hospital. By the time Taeyong and Ru Rai arrived, they were gone. They only found someone cleaning up the broken glass on the floor. The man told them that there had almost been a tragedy, but luckily Calvin arrived in time to take Ae Rai to the hospital. He then handed Ti-Yang the medicine bottle Ae Rai had supposedly taken. Ru Rai and Ti-Yang immediately sought out So-Won, giving him the medicine to examine. So-Won stated that the dosage wasn't enough to be fatal. Ti-Yang and Ru Rai instantly realized this was another of Ae Rai's schemes. She was trying to exploit Calvin's compassion to stay at the company. Sure enough, after Ae Rai regained consciousness and saw Calvin in her hospital room, she resumed her manipulative games. This led Calvin to believe he had driven Ae Rai to this extreme, making him feel guilty. Seeing this, Ae Rai proposed to stay with Calvin. If he kept Ae Rai, Ti-Yang would undoubtedly leave. This put Calvin in a difficult position. At the hospital, Ti-Yang immediately exposed Ae Rai's scheme, pointing out that she was using manipulative tactics to cover up her own wrongdoing. He warned Calvin not to be fooled by her tears, insisting that keeping Ae Rai around would only lead to more people getting hurt. Ae Rai retorted, accusing Ti-Yang of not caring about her life and claiming he'd been secretly investigating her medication. She challenged him, asking if he'd only be satisfied when she stopped breathing, implying she would use her own life as leverage. Turning to Calvin, Ae Rai declared her desire to stay by his side, refusing to leave even if he asked her to. Seeing Calvin's reluctance to refuse, Ti-Yang once again left without hesitation. Ru Rai sensed something more sinister at play. If Ae Rai's intentions went beyond marrying Ti-Yang, she worried she might harm Calvin. Back home, Ti-Yang overheard a conversation between Hwa Young and Young-do. Young-do denied removing Calvin's life support, claiming he only visited the hospital once and was spotted by Ti-Yang. Ti-Yang, initially suspecting Young-do, hadn't investigated further. But if someone else was responsible, he needed to re-evaluate the situation. Recalling Ru Rai's words, Ti-Yang realized everything had happened too smoothly. He became convinced Ae Rai had an accomplice. The next day, he retrieved surveillance footage, but it was stolen immediately after he left. He sought professional help to recover the footage, a process that would take 3 to 5 days. Worried the hard drive might be irrecoverable, Ru Rai and Ti-Yang spoke to a hospital nurse. The nurse helped them identify the staff on duty that night. However, Min-ho happened to see them and immediately alerted Young Hyuk. Young Hyuk arrived at the hospital to retrieve the very footage Ti-Yang was trying to recover. Ti-Yang and Ru Rai questioned the nurse further, hoping she could recognize the man in question. Just as they entered the elevator, Young Hyuk walked past the nurse. She instantly recognized him as the perpetrator and contacted Ti-Yang. Upon reaching the lower floor, Ti-Yang received the nurse's call, directing him to the parking garage. When he arrived, the nurse informed him the man had entered a patient's room. Ti-Yang cautiously opened Ae Rai's door, but only found Ae Rai and Min-ho inside. The man was gone. Meanwhile, Ru Rai, waiting downstairs, spotted Young Hyuk. Calvin had previously fired Zun Dong for harming Ti-Yang, so his presence was suspicious. Ti-Yang rushed to Ru Rai, asking if she'd seen anyone leave. They shared information and showed the nurse a picture, who confirmed it was indeed the man from that night. Ti-Yang relayed the events at the hospital to his family. Haeyoung voiced her suspicions about Min-ho, recalling how he had manipulated situations, leading Hwa Young to misunderstand Ru Rai's family. It now seemed they were all in cahoots. Finding Young Hyuk became the priority. Young-do enlisted help and quickly located him. As they arrived at his building, they saw Young Hyuk driving away. Ti-Yang and Ru Rai followed discreetly. On a rooftop, 2 men struggled, and the younger one suddenly fell. The older man looked panicked. It turned out Min-ho, fearing exposure, had urged Young Hyuk to flee the country. Young Hyuk refused and threatened him with evidence, leading to the tragic fall. Young Hyuk lay severely injured, unable to move. A mysterious woman approached, took his phone, and gave it to Min-ho, instructing him to destroy it. Suddenly, a car approached, scaring them away. Ti-Yang and Ru Rai found Young Hyuk, immobile but alive, and rushed him to the hospital. The next day, Ti-Yang was appointed as a company director, officially becoming Calvin's heir. Min-ho offered feigned congratulations before leaving. Ti-Yang questioned Calvin about Min-ho and Ae Rai's relationship. Calvin explained that Min-ho, like himself, was a lonely man and likely saw Ae Rai as a daughter. He assured Ti-Yang that Min-ho was trustworthy. Min-ho held no company shares, and Ae Rai shares were inherited from Michu. Currently, Ti-Yang and Calvin were the largest shareholders. Unbeknownst to them, Min-ho overheard their entire conversation. Just then, Tae-young received news that Young Hyuk had regained consciousness. He and Ru-rai rushed to the hospital, but Min-ho and the mysterious woman had arrived first. They lied to the nurse, claiming to be Young Hyuk's family and wanting to transfer him to a better hospital, hoping for immediate discharge. After Min-ho left to handle the paperwork, the woman pulled a pen from her pocket, lifted Young Hyuk's blanket, and jabbed him in the calf. Young Hyuk cried out in pain. At that moment, a noise came from the doorway. The woman quickly hid in the bathroom as Tae-young and Ru-rai entered. Seeing Young Hyuk awake, Tae-young bombarded him with questions, but he couldn't speak. Tae-young and Ru-rai went to find the attending physician, who informed them that the patient's family had just completed discharge procedures. Sensing something was amiss, Tae-young and Ru-rai ran back towards the room, narrowly missing a passing gurney carrying the very man they were looking for. Young Hyuk. Ru-rai bumped into a woman, apologized quickly, and continued running. Back in the room, the nurse confirmed the patient's discharge. As she described the family members, Ru-rai recognized the woman she had bumped into. By the time they reached the lower floor, it was too late. However, Ru-rai had gotten a clear look at the woman's face, noticing a distinct burn scar. Back in Calvin's office, he confirmed he didn't know the scarred woman. Tae-young and Ru-rai wondered if she was Ae-rai's accomplice. At Young Hyuk's apartment building, they posed as his colleagues, claiming he was hospitalized and they needed to retrieve his clothes. The building manager informed them someone had just been there, using a key to enter. Tae-young and Ru-rai grew even more suspicious. They discovered a letter from Young Hyuk containing a picture of Min-ho and an unfamiliar woman. Ru-rai realized the woman resembled the one from the hospital. Were she and Min-ho working together? The next day, Tae-young and Ru-rai's parents arranged a formal meeting, signifying their approval of the marriage. After the meeting, a beaming Calvin saw them off and was about to get into his car when he spotted the scarred woman watching him from a distance. He rushed towards her, but she disappeared into an elevator. Recalling Ru-rai's description, Calvin stood frozen, deeply disturbed. Back in his office, he picked up an old photograph. The woman in the picture had supposedly died 3 years ago. Why had she reappeared? He was certain he hadn't been mistaken. Calvin summoned Tae-young and Ru-rai, showing them the picture. Ru-rai confirmed it was the woman from the hospital. Calvin revealed that she was Ae-rai's mother, and he had just seen her in the parking lot. Stunned, Tae-young and Ru-rai questioned her supposed death. Calvin explained that 3 years prior, he had returned to his home country to find Ae-rai's mother. Min-ho later informed him of her critical illness. Calvin rushed overseas but couldn't see her before she passed. Min-ho handled the funeral arrangements. Had he and Ae-rai's mother been deceiving him all along? Tae-young shared his findings with Calvin. Ae-rai's mother, now using a different name, was a business partner of their company. He showed Calvin a picture which matched the woman in Calvin's photograph. She had been treating the burn for 3 years, only covering her face, making it impossible to determine if it was really her. Even Ae-rai didn't know her mother was still alive. So, was there a larger conspiracy behind her deliberate concealment of her identity? The woman who was presumed dead 3 years ago had returned triumphantly, becoming the largest investor in their company. Calvin was still in shock. After introducing herself, she shook his hand and greeted Tae-young. At the same time, she reminded Tae-young that if he wanted to become the true heir, Calvin's bloodline alone was not enough. He also needed the recognition of the shareholders. She stated that tomorrow, at the grand opening of the new store, would be an opportunity to assess Tae-young's capabilities. Calvin questioned Min-ho about why he had kept this from him. Min-ho tried to explain that he didn't know either. But when Calvin presented the photo of him and Mai-chu, Min-ho still defended himself, saying he had no choice. Calvin was furious at Min-ho's betrayal. Over the years, he had treated him like family, but in the end, he had been stabbed in the back. At that moment, the office door suddenly opened. Mai-chu walked in and said that not informing Calvin beforehand was her idea. She reproached Calvin for abandoning her and Ae-rai, and returning to the country alone. She said that everything that had made her who she was now was caused by Calvin. Back then, she was desperate and only wanted Calvin to live a life of regret. Unexpectedly, her life was too strong, and she didn't die. When she woke up in the hospital, her whole body was burned, and she couldn't face Calvin, so she chose to fake her death. For the past 3 years, Mai-chu had endured pain just to restore her face. After being discharged from the hospital, she immediately went to find Calvin, wanting to be by his side. Calvin asked if anyone could endure such extreme love. The next day, the new store opened. Everything was ready, and everyone at the entrance warmly greeted customers. Young-do also came to help, taking on the role of chef. He reassured Tae-young that he could leave everything in the store to him. After finishing their work, Tae-young and Roo-rai returned to attend the launch party. Before that was the meeting between the parents of the two. This time it was a meal between family members. Even Sun and Yeonju had returned to their in-laws' house. They had gone through countless difficulties but finally decided to remarry. Calvin had been lonely for almost his entire life, so he really enjoyed the lively atmosphere of a family gathering like this. Strangely, even though it was their first meeting, he and Chun-ok got along very well. Even the dishes she cooked were very much to his taste. Chun-ok also felt very close when she was with Calvin. The dinner ended in a cheerful atmosphere. Suddenly, Calvin heard singing coming from the bathroom. This song felt incredibly familiar to him. Calvin stepped out of the restroom, following the singing to search. He was just about to open the door to see who was singing when Tae-young suddenly said that the company had urgent business that required Calvin's immediate return. It turned out that after they left, a major incident occurred at the new store. Someone reported them for using illegally circulating food. Reporters from several major media outlets came to interview and also discovered substandard food. Very quickly, the food incident at the new store made headlines. The reputation built over many years collapsed in an instant. Roo-rai and Tae-young, seeing the malicious comments online, suspected that this was not simple, as if someone was manipulating it from behind. The supplier had been a partner for over 10 years, but today, such a thing suddenly happened when the new store opened. The police launched an investigation, believing that results would be available soon. Calvin also didn't understand who wanted to harm him. Tae-young told Calvin that during his hospitalization, someone had tried to kill him, and the mastermind was Ae-rai's mother. But Min-ho, who was outside, overheard and immediately informed Michu. Soon after, Michu came to Calvin's office. Calvin asked if Michu was the one who reported the new store. Michu not only did not panic but also accused Calvin of slander. When Calvin asked about removing the breathing tube in the hospital, Michu evaded, saying that she had not yet been discharged from the hospital at that time. After saying that, Michu even called the hospital on the spot. But Calvin didn't know that Michu's attending physician had been bribed by her. Without evidence, they couldn't do anything to her. On the contrary, Michu accused Calvin of not trusting her and threatened to make Calvin pay. The next day, Calvin called Ae-rai to the office. When she heard about removing the breathing tube in the hospital, she awkwardly turned away, saying nothing. Calvin said that if she confessed honestly, it would be as if nothing had happened, but Ae-rai still didn't admit to doing it. Calvin advised her not to abet Michu, otherwise she would only ruin her own life. After listening, Ae-rai panicked and ran out of the office. Tae-young and Roo-rai arrived at the company and just happened to see Ae-rai coming out of the elevator. They chased her to the stairs and overheard Ae-rai talking to Min-ho, also realizing that Ae-rai was the one who caused this. They didn't know where Chun-hook had been taken. The most urgent thing now was to increase the sales of the new store. They decided to launch a delivery service. Ae-rai returned home, feeling uneasy, wanting to see Calvin to confess everything. But Michu stuffed her into the passenger seat, not allowing Ae-rai to ruin her plan. Her conscience awakened. Ae-rai said that she didn't need anything. Previously, she removed Calvin's breathing tube because she hated that Calvin only cared about Tae-young and believed that Michu's death was related to Calvin. Now that she saw Michu was still alive, she was satisfied. But Michu was blinded by hatred. She had been planning for 3 years and absolutely would not allow herself to give up halfway. No one was allowed to stand in her way, not even her own daughter. The woman got drunk and told the driver to take her home. Myung-rang and Roo-rai hurriedly ran over to help her and told the driver that Ae-rai was their friend. Myung-rang was responsible for taking Ae-rai home. After sending the driver away, she took Ae-rai's car keys and investigated her travel history. Roo-rai wanted to find out where Young-hyuk had been hidden. Soon, Myung-rang finished and got into the car. They eavesdropped on the conversation between Ae-rai and her mother, learning that Young-hyuk had been taken to a nursing home. Suddenly, the car door was opened by someone outside. Roo-rai was pulled violently to the ground. Unexpectedly, Ae-rai woke up so quickly. Ru Rai asked Ae Rai where Young Hyuk was hidden, but Ae Rai insisted on not saying. Unable to get the answer, Ru Rai and Myung Rang had to leave. Luckily, Myung Rang had taken Ae Rai's phone. They immediately texted Minho. Minho did not suspect anything. Ae Rai sent the location of the nursing home. It was the same hospital where Ae Rai's mother was receiving rehabilitation treatment. Michu did not forget to put pressure on Calvin and his son. When signing the investment contract, there was an initial agreement that if they couldn't be listed on the stock exchange next month, they would have to repay the entire investment amount. The food incident at the new store made it impossible for them to be listed, meaning they had to repay 15 billion within a month. Unless they could find an investor to lend them money, it would be very difficult to recover. Myung Rang was guarding downstairs. Ru Rai disguised herself as a cleaner, sneaked into the 8th floor, and successfully entered the isolation area. Ru Rai found Young Hyuk and explained her purpose in coming here. She hid Young Hyuk under her clothes to get past the security. Suddenly, she saw Min Ho approaching. As they passed each other, Ru Rai turned her face away, worried about being discovered, and her heart pounded in her chest. Luckily, Min Ho only saw the clothes and didn't pay attention. By the time he entered the hospital room, the person was gone. He immediately remembered the cleaning staff that had just been there. By this time, they had taken Young Hyuk downstairs. Myung Rang and Ru Rai quickly got Young Hyuk into the car. They hadn't gone far when Min Ho chased after them. Ru Rai saw Tae-young approaching and signaled for him to block Min Ho. Tae-young, who had been following Min Ho, decisively blocked the car in front of Min Ho, personally blocking Min Ho himself to protect Ru Rai and the others as they left. Michu, upon learning of her daughter's carelessness that allowed Ru Rai to exploit the lapse in security, became furious. She stormed into Calvin's office, throwing the contract in front of him. Michu demanded that Calvin return half the money within 3 days, or else hand over the position of chairman to her. Otherwise, she would force Tae-young and Ae Rai to marry. After hearing about this, Ru Rai decided to seek help from Chun Ok. Ru Rai and Tae-young went to Chun Ok at night, hoping she would invest in their company. But Chun Ok didn't want any monetary transactions with relatives to avoid ruining their relationship. No matter what they said, she wouldn't budge. Tae-young told Ru Rai to leave this to him because he didn't want her offending Chun Ok because of him. Ru Rai couldn't bear to see Tae-young and Calvin being cornered, nor did she want to see Calvin's years of hard work being stolen by others. She had even prepared for the worst-case scenario. If there was still no way out in 2 days, she would let Tae-young marry Ae Rai. But Tae-young only loved Ru Rai, so of course he refused. He reassured her that they would definitely overcome the difficulties. Michu, believing that Calvin had no way out, forced him to drink the glass of liquor in front of her. 20 years ago, she was the one who helped Calvin quit drinking. Michu argued that without her, there would be no Calvin of today. If Calvin returned to that time, would he be willing to give up fighting for the company? But Calvin didn't want to be controlled anymore. He threw the glass of liquor in Michu's face. All these years, he had treated her and her daughter like family, but he didn't expect Michu to threaten him so aggressively. Calvin said that he would find a way to keep the company himself. The next day, Tae-young brought Young Hyuk to the scene of the incident. In a moment of agitation, Young Hyuk regained his memory. Although his phone had been destroyed by Min Ho, he had saved important evidence in his email inbox. Young-do also had a new discovery. Through dashcam footage, he discovered that Ae Rai was the one who caused the incident. Calvin frowned after watching the recording. Then, he heard the recording Tae-young provided, and his heart ached. Calvin immediately asked Ae Rai to come to the company for a confrontation. Whether it was the food incident or the ventilator removal at the hospital, Ae Rai swore she didn't do it. Calvin's disappointment in Ae Rai increased another level. Reluctantly, he presented the evidence in his possession. Not only Ae Rai, but also Michu and Min Ho were involved. If he handed the evidence over to the police, they would have to spend at least a few years in prison. Faced with ironclad evidence, Ae Rai finally became afraid and begged Michu to save her. But she underestimated Michu's ruthlessness. She told Calvin to hand the evidence over to the police. Ae Rai couldn't believe that her own mother could be so heartless. But Michu acted as if nothing had happened, only telling her to go home. Ae Rai left the office feeling dejected. Shin Mo learned that his daughter had tried to borrow money from Chun Ok but was rejected. He asked his daughter if she was in trouble. Ru Rai told her father that the company was having financial problems. If they couldn't get 7.5 billion tomorrow, The company that Calvin had been running for many years would be stolen by others. Shin Mo didn't have that much money either, so he took Calvin to see Chun Ok at night. He wanted to persuade her to invest in Calvin's company. Although Chun Ok was a super rich tycoon, her money wasn't easy come, easy go. She had to keep that money for her family, including the son she had lost for many years and was still looking for. Chun Ok absolutely wouldn't dare to touch that money. No matter how much they pleaded, she wouldn't agree. When they got home, Shin Mo started calculating his pension. The next day, just as he was preparing to go to process the paperwork, Yeonju suddenly called, telling Shin Mo to come to the house for a visit. Chun Ok saw the documents that Shin Mo brought and knew that he had used up all his retirement savings to help his daughter. She could understand the hearts of parents for their children. Finally, Chun Ok agreed to help Calvin. Just now, she learned that the son she raised had died. The money she made was also for her children. If that's the case, then she might as well do a good deed. Ru Rai arranged to meet Ae Rai and presented her with the evidence. She told Ae Rai that Calvin genuinely considered her like a daughter. Even if the company fell into someone else's hands, Calvin didn't want to hand Ae Rai over to the police. Ae Rai hadn't expected her own mother to abandon her, but Calvin had forgiven her multiple times. Even Ru Rai was prepared to break up with Taeyang. Such selfless love deeply moved Ae Rai. She decided to test her mother. Ae Rai told her that Calvin had submitted the evidence. The police had just called to tell her to come in for questioning tomorrow. But Michu didn't hesitate, telling Ae Rai to reveal everything but not to drag her into it. Ae Rai had completely seen through her mother's true face. Michu's coldness deeply saddened her. Just when Calvin was resigned to giving up on everything, Chun Ok generously came to his office. Calvin was very surprised to see them. Chun Ok told someone to bring in 3 black suitcases, filled with cash, plus a check for 6 billion. A true mogul's intervention was something else, immediately resolving Calvin's urgent problem. Just as Chun Ok was leaving triumphantly, she encountered Michu and Min Ho approaching. At a glance, she recognized Min Ho as the person who told her earlier today that her son had died. So, Chun Ok asked Taeyang who that man was. Taeyang said he used to be Calvin's assistant but had betrayed him and joined the other side. Learning that Calvin's name before adoption was Unchu, Chun Ok hurriedly asked Taeyang if he had a photo. After comparing the 2 photos, Chun Ok nearly fainted. Michu had intended to go to the office to watch the drama unfold, but discovered that Calvin had raised enough money. She was so angry she almost threw up blood. She had personally blocked all the investors, yet Calvin was still able to get through smoothly. Michu demanded to know who was interfering with her. Just then, the office door opened again. Chun Ok walked in grandly again. Min Ho bowed his head in shame when he saw Chun Ok. Calvin couldn't believe that Min Ho had prevented him from reuniting with his family. Enraged, he took out his anger on Min Ho, hitting him several times. After hitting Min Ho, he hit Michu. Finally, Calvin realized that Chun Ok was his stepmother, the one who gave him so many warm memories when he was young. They had been searching for each other all this time. Calvin was Unchu, the one who had been lost for many years. Finding his mother made Calvin extremely emotional, and tears welled up in his eyes. She thought she could push Calvin to the brink, but she didn't expect it to lead to him finding his family. Michu was furious and gritted her teeth. When Taeyang told Ru Rai that the money problem had been solved, Chun Ok was deeply moved. This meant that Ru Rai and Taeyang didn't have to break up. Ae Rai arranged a meeting with Ru Rai and Taeyang. She greatly admired Ru Rai for having loving parents, unlike her. Since she was born, she had been her mother's burden. The happiest time of her life was the time she spent with Calvin. After Calvin left, Michu became extreme and crazy. But after all, Michu was her family. She was willing to bear all the guilt in place of her mother, so that Michu wouldn't continue to harm others. She would transfer all her shares to Taeyang's name. At this moment, Michu and Min Ho rushed in, but they only cared about whether their daughter had been exposed. They scorned the evidence that Taeyang presented. Based solely on Ae Rai's recording, they couldn't be convicted. After speaking, Michu left with confidence. Taeyang and Ru Rai persuaded Ae Rai that if they let the tiger return to the forest like that, the consequences would be immeasurable. Ae Rai originally intended to bear all the guilt in place of Michu, but a phone call completely changed her mind. Ae Rai took Taeyang and Ru Rai to Michu's office. She opened Michu's safe and took out all the evidence of her conspiracy. With the evidence in hand, Michu couldn't escape punishment. Taeyong immediately reported this good news to Calvin. Rai was able to stop in time because she had seen through her mother's coldness and selfishness. The only person who was truly good to her was Calvin. The child's mother was talking to several parents, leaving her child to play to the side. Suddenly, a store employee slowly approached the little girl. The little girl looked at the person approaching and was a little scared. The store employee bent down and said a few words to the little girl. The little girl hurriedly ran to her mother's side and tugged at her mother's hand, urging her to go home. Her mother could only say goodbye to the parents and leave. Unexpectedly, the store employee took a photo of them. The next day, a woman followed the child to Yeonju's house. Seeing Sonon and Yeonju being so intimate, she confirmed that Yeonju was So-won's wife. Taking advantage of So-won being at work, the woman befriended Yeonju. A barrage of flattery made Yeonju burst out laughing, and she enthusiastically invited her to stay for lunch. The woman toured Yeonju's house and discovered a family photo of the three of them in the living room. The sweet and happy family scene filled her with disdain. Her sister was suffering in prison while they were enjoying family happiness. As it turned out, she was Soo-jae, Soo-mai's younger sister. Seeing the phone in the living room, she hatched a plan. The next day, when no one was watching, she secretly left a letter in the mailbox at the back door, then hid in a corner. At this time, So-won and Yeonju had just gone out. After seeing Sonon off to work, Yeonju was about to go inside when she saw the letter in the mailbox. The sender claimed to know the background of her daughter, making Yeonju feel like she was sitting on pins and needles. Just then, she received a call from an unknown number. Soo-jae used Hanjol as leverage, intending to extort a large sum of money. Yeonju became even more worried after hearing this. When So-won and Chun-ok arrived at the door, they happened to see Soo-jae looking triumphant. Soo-jae noticed So-won looking at her and quickly ran away. So-won told Chun-ok to go inside first and quickly chased after Soo-jae. He questioned her intentions. Soo-jae brazenly claimed that she came to visit Hanjol. So-won didn't believe her lies. If she really cared about Hanjol, she wouldn't have abandoned him to him. Because of Hanjol, he and Yeonju had divorced. Life had just started to settle down when she reappeared. Yesterday, Soo-jae had taken advantage of the fact that no one was around to scare Hanjol. She threatened to take Hanjol away if he told anyone in the family. This terrified Hanjol and gave him nightmares. Waking up, Hanjol pretended to be sick, refusing to go to kindergarten. No matter how much his family tried to persuade him, Hanjol refused to go. He just hoped that his mother wouldn't go to the cafe anymore. Yeonju didn't understand why her child was acting like this, but she promised that she wouldn't go there again. Finally, Hanjol smiled. So-won found it strange, so he went to the cafe to ask if there was a colleague named Soo-mai. The girl told him that it wasn't Soo-mai, but Soo-jae, the owner's daughter. Her mother was sick, so she came to Hanjol's house today to check up on him. So-won rushed home and saw Soo-jae talking to Hanjol. Hanjol saw his father and quickly ran to him. Soo-jae saw So-won and tried to run away. So-won pulled her to a quiet place. Unexpectedly, Soo-jae was so bold that she dared to come to his house. Soo-jae shamelessly asked to stay. Did she think that people with money were stupid? At this time, Yeonju walked in, but she had only met Soo-mai and didn't know Soo-jae. Soo-jae seized the opportunity and quickly ran away. So-won said that the woman was not a good person, telling Yeonju not to bring her home in the future. She absolutely could not be allowed to appear near Hanjol. Yeonju found So-won's tension suspicious, but thinking of Hanjol, she agreed. Yeonju was extremely worried about this, fearing that the other party would reveal Hanjol's background. At that moment, she received a call from a stranger who instructed her to leave money at a designated location. Before Yeonju could react, the caller hung up. Early that morning, So-won visited the prison and learned that Soo-mai had been released a month prior. So-won knew the two sisters were planning to exploit Hanjol for money again. He was so enraged that he wanted to throw them to the sharks. Suddenly, he spotted Soo-jae getting into a taxi and secretly followed her. Yeonju couldn't come up with that much cash on short notice, so she frantically asked her mother for help. Under her mother's questioning, Yeonju revealed the threatening letter. Chun-ok accompanied Yeonju to the designated location and placed the money where instructed. Soon after, Soo-jae sneaked into the women's restroom. Just as Soo-jae was gloating over her cleverness and exited the restroom, Yeonju and her mother blocked her path. Chun Ok pulled down Sujai's mask. Yeonju was shocked. Sujai, despite being exposed, didn't panic and threatened to reveal Hanjol's background. Chun Ok then gave her a beating. At that moment, So-won entered and glared menacingly at Sujai. He loathed people who were so traitorous. Afterward, they took Sujai in for questioning. Sujai claimed that Su-mai wasn't involved in any of this, So-won told her to call Su-mai. To protect Su-mai, Sujai even knelt down, begging for forgiveness and promising never to appear before them again. So-won insisted that she make sure Su-mai came. Sujai lowered her head and remained silent. Just then, So-won's phone rang. It was Su-mai calling. So-won told Su-mai to come to their location immediately. Yeonju suddenly remembered that Hanjol would be getting out of school soon. As she came downstairs, she spotted Su-mai staring intently at Hanjol. Yeonju immediately shielded Hanjol behind her. The two women faced each other in silence. Betrayal was a common occurrence for Su-mai. Did Su-mai really show up only for the money? She was the most shameless woman they'd ever seen. She begged others to raise her child and now wanted to use Hanjol for extortion. Chun Ok was furious to the point of madness that her daughter was being extorted. Chun Ok told Su-mai to get a real job since she had arms and legs, instead of heartlessly selling her daughter. Seeing that Su-mai was still indifferent and showed no remorse, Chun Ok threw the bag of money on the ground, telling Su-mai to take the money and get lost. She warned her never to appear before Hanjol again. Su-mai didn't say a word and bent down to pick up the money. Su-mai didn't feel any guilt or shame holding the money. She said she would never see them again, but secretly went to the kindergarten to watch Hanjol, even taking photos of him. The next day, on the way to pick up Hanjol up from school, Yeonju asked, "Has Sujai been around lately?" Hanjol told her that Sujai hadn't been there, but Su-mai had come to the kindergarten yesterday. Upon hearing this, Yeonju slammed on the brakes, warning Hanjol not to follow them if they appeared again. Hanjol obediently agreed, but Yeonju still felt uneasy. Sun attended a conference at another hospital, where a woman named Suin caught his attention. After Suin left, So-won asked a nurse who she was. The nurse said she was Su-mai's younger sister, who worked in the hospital's identification department. So-won pondered this and suddenly felt uneasy. He immediately called his father. He learned that his father had taken Hanjol for an identification test, and Su-mai had specifically requested this hospital. So-won told his father to find the identification records. When his father said the examiner was Suin, So-won had a bold suspicion. He suspected the identification report might be fake. Waiting for So-won, hazy in his mind, to arrive back home, he heard Yeonju saying that Su-mai had come to the kindergarten. He was more certain that this woman never kept her word. Yeonju was concerned that Hanjol would be kidnapped by her. So-won remembered Hanjol's identification records, which made him bitter. He promised to deal with this himself. Just then, the kindergarten needed to know Hanjol's blood type. So-won took this opportunity to get Hanjol's blood type tested. He found out that Hanjol had blood type B. So-won became more suspicious and wanted to secretly retest Hanjol one more time. Seeing Jeonju coming back, he stopped. So-won told Yeonju to take Hanjol home first. Afterward, he went to the hospital where Suin worked, demanding that she hand over the original identification record for Hanjol. Fearing exposure, Suin claimed that no records were kept. Sun said that he would then have the identification test done at another hospital. If the results from the two hospitals were different, he would resort to legal means and told Suin to prepare herself. After So-won left, Suin called Su-mai and recounted So-won's visit. On the way home, Hanjol also told her mother what had just happened. Yeonju immediately called Shin Mo. Afterward, she went to Shin Mo's house to get the identification records and brought them home for So-won to see. Yeonju asked So-won if he suspected the identification records. So-won said Suin was Su-mai's younger sister, and he suspected that the identification records had been tampered with. His and Su-mai's blood types were both A, so how could Hanjol be born with blood type B? Yeonju was also uneasy after hearing this. They had worked so hard to find happiness, and this was making Yeonju lose her appetite and sleep. Hanjol obediently massaged Yeonju's legs and comforted her, saying she would be worried if Yeonju got sick. Yeonju couldn't help but hug this understanding Hanjol tightly. In the end, Yeonju decided not to do any more identification tests. No matter the result, she didn't want to give up Hanjol. So Won also promised his wife that he wouldn't bring up this matter again. But Soo Mai worried that an identification test on Hanjol would expose the truth. Early the next morning, she arranged to meet with Yeonju. As soon as they met, Soo Mai asked if they had done the identification test yet. Yeonju immediately understood that if Hanjol were really So Won's child, Soo Mai wouldn't be in such a rush to find them. Sure enough, Soo Mai admitted that Hanjol wasn't So Won's child. Yeonju was furious with Soo Mai's behavior for looking down on their family. But Soo Mai said, after all, she was wealthy, and raising a child wasn't a big deal. Moreover, Yeonju couldn't have children. Wasn't this Hanjol they picked up a good thing? So Won became furious, hearing that Hanjol almost ruined his marriage. The two had a fierce argument because of it. Just then, Chun Ok overheard them outside the door and angrily asked what was going on. Soo Mai didn't hide anything and said that it was thanks to her child that they were able to conceal the fact that Yeonju couldn't get pregnant. They should be grateful to her. Chun Ok was so angry she wanted to kill her. But Soo Mai arrogantly mocked Yeonju, making fun of her for not being able to get pregnant. Chun Ok said, "Who told Soo Mai that my daughter can't get pregnant?" With that, she took out the pregnancy test stick that she had made Yeonju take that morning. Soo Mai's face turned pale when she saw it, and she no longer had any basis for her arrogance. Chun Ok said that because Soo Mai kept using Hanjol to interfere in her daughter's life, she was telling Soo Mai to take Hanjol away. Soo Mai immediately stood frozen, not daring to say anything. The woman who had just been mocking someone else for not being able to get pregnant was slapped in the face by reality in the blink of an eye. Chun Ok forced Soo Mai to take Hanjol away immediately. Soo Mai immediately changed her attitude, kneeling on the ground and weeping pathetically, begging for forgiveness. Soo Mai said that she had her own difficulties in doing so, promising that she would never visit Hanjol again. Chun Ok angrily chased Soo Mai away. She said that if she dared to bother them again, she would kill her. Soo Mai had no choice but to run away. As soon as she got outside, Soo Mai ran into Hanjol on the way home from school. Soo Mai pretended not to recognize her, but Hanjol called her back. She asked if Soo Mai used to cook for her and come to her kindergarten. Soo Mai hurriedly said she didn't know her and ran off. But Hanjol still watched her with certainty in her eyes. So Won and Yeonju felt mixed emotions at the sight. They thought Hanjol was young and had no memory. At first, So Won and Yeonju planned to hide it from Hanjol, but they didn't expect Hanjol to know that Soo Mai was her mother. It's just that she was afraid that her father would be angry, so she didn't dare to say it. So Won and Yeonju were heartbroken that Hanjol had to endure such great pressure at such a young age. The next day, the whole family took Yeonju to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor told them that Yeonju was pregnant with twins. Being pregnant was what Yeonju had dreamed of her whole life, and now she was pregnant with twins. Yeonju's whole family was overjoyed. So Won told Yeonju to wait for him in the lobby, and he would bring the car around. Yeonju looked up and saw Soo Mai and Soo Jae. She wondered why they were at the hospital. Soo Mai seemed to have been crying very sadly. The next day, someone returned the money to Chun Ok. The nurse said that a young woman had brought it. So Won hurried after her and discovered it was Soo Jae. Soo Jae said Soo Mai had been suffering from long-term diabetes, which had damaged her retinas. If she didn't have surgery, she would risk going blind. Before the surgery, Soo Mai didn't want to touch that money. So Won went to Soo Mai's house to persuade her to have the surgery. But Soo Mai gave up and didn't want to have the surgery. Soo Mai told him to take the childhood photos of Hanjol. If they stayed here, she would always remember Hanjol. So Won dragged Soo Mai to the hospital, greeted the doctor, and scheduled the surgery. Unexpectedly, Yeonju and Chun Ok also came for a checkup that day. The driver waiting downstairs happened to see So Won getting into a car with a strange woman. When he got home, the driver told the nanny that he had seen So Won and a strange woman in the hospital parking lot. After hearing the driver's description, the nanny immediately guessed it was Soo Mai. Unexpectedly, Chun Ok suddenly appeared from behind and asked if what they were saying was true. The driver had no choice but to tell the truth. Chun Ok assumed Soo Mai was clinging to So Won again and worried that her daughter wouldn't be able to handle it if she found out, so she instructed them not to talk about this to anyone else. Chun Ok took Shin Mo and the driver to find Soo Mai, intending to teach her a lesson. Unexpectedly, Soo Mai came out of the house, but squinted her eyes and asked who they were. The elderly couple looked at Soo Mai as if she were an idiot. It wasn't until Soo Mai clearly recognized them that she was extremely surprised. So-won gave Hanjol's photo album to Yeonju and proactively told her about Soo-mai's situation. The reason he openly told the pregnant Yeonju the truth was because he didn't want Yeonju to hear it from someone else and have it affect their marital relationship. His relationship with Soo-mai was a thing of the past. Now, he was only helping her because of Hanjol. He knew Hanjol also wanted to see her mother. Afterward, he showed Yeonju Hanjol's drawing. But Yeonju didn't agree to let Soo-mai meet her child. She would persuade Soo-mai to get surgery. When So-won and Yeonju arrived in front of Soo-mai's house, they saw Chun Ok and Shin Mo coming out. Knowing that Chun Ok had come to teach Soo-mai a lesson, Yeonju hurriedly said that Soo-mai was sick and had no intention of breaking up their family. When they entered the house, they found Soo-mai lying on the ground. Chun Ok and Shin Mo also didn't understand what happened. Knowing the situation, Yeonju and So-won gave Soo-mai fruit juice, and she gradually woke up. They wanted to persuade Soo-mai to get surgery, but she adamantly refused. Chun Ok scolded Soo-mai again. If it weren't for Hanjol, she wouldn't bother caring about Soo-mai. Yeonju took out the picture Hanjol drew for Soo-mai, hoping she would have a reason to continue living. Seeing this, Soo-mai was both touched and regretful, and she burst into tears. After this incident, Yeonju also realized something. What's meant to be will be. She decided that she would let Hanjol meet Soo-mai in the future. After having a child, she understood how a mother could bear to be apart from her child. The child's birth mother cruelly abandoned her years ago, but now she was proactively asking to meet her daughter. Yeonju had 100,000 unpleasant feelings in her heart. But tomorrow, Soo-mai would have surgery. If the surgery wasn't successful, she would never see Hanjol again. She reluctantly agreed to let them meet. Yeonju helped Hanjol prepare the dress she liked the most. So-won asked Hanjol if she wanted to see her mother. Suddenly, Hanjol burst into tears. She didn't understand why her birth mother had abandoned her. If she had already abandoned her, why did she want to see her now? Seeing Hanjol crying sadly, So-won comforted her, saying that her mother had only gone far away back then and never thought of abandoning her. The child still shook her head, saying she didn't want to meet her. Hearing the child's cries, Yeonju's heart felt like it was breaking, and she ran to her room and cried her heart out. She really couldn't bear to let the child leave, let alone when the child didn't want to leave. At this time, the child came to the room and asked Yeonju if she could come back if she left. Hearing this, Yeonju felt even more heartbroken. She hugged the child tightly, gently comforting her that she would come back. Finally, the child agreed to meet Soo-mai. But in her eyes, Soo-mai was just a stranger. When Soo-mai grabbed the child's hand, she shook it off and angrily moved closer to Yeonju. After So-won and Yeonju comforted her, the child moved closer to Soo-mai again. Soo-mai once again grabbed the child's hand and apologized. Soo-mai said, "I'm sorry. I was really wrong." But the child cruelly said, "I don't like you. I hate you." She wouldn't even let Soo-mai touch her. Soo-mai prepared a lavish dinner for the child. After a day, the child was no longer distant from Soo-mai. Seeing that Soo-mai couldn't clearly see the glass of water on the table, the child thoughtfully asked, "Is Soo-mai sick?" Soo-mai said that her eyes weren't good and that she had to have surgery tomorrow. The child blew on her hand and then put her hand on Soo-mai's eyes, comforting her that Soo-mai would definitely get better. Looking at the well-behaved child, Soo-mai became even more reluctant to leave her. Soo-mai told Yeonju that she wanted to raise the child herself. Now that she had actually met her, she couldn't bear to be apart. Yeonju was very confused by Soo-mai's erratic changes. Not to mention their family's circumstances. This whole time had created turmoil in So-won's household. Now that they had finally gained their understanding with great difficulty, how could they make things more difficult? Besides, the child might not even want to live with them. But Soo-mai said that she gave birth to the child. She believed that she could provide the child with a happy life. Soo-mai was determined to raise the child at all costs. At this moment, the child suddenly came out wearing her backpack, telling Soo-mai that she wanted to go home. Soo-mai hurriedly said that it was already dark, and she should stay at their house. She was afraid that if she was separated from the child, she would never see her again. But the child said that she didn't want to. She wanted to go home and find her mother. She even cried, saying that she missed her mother. Soo-mai hurriedly said that she was the child's mother too. But the child wouldn't accept Soo-mai as her mother. Yeonju had been restless all day. She kept thinking about whether the child would come back. Even at bedtime, she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Seeing that it was already 11 o'clock, she couldn't restrain herself any longer. She sat up and told So-won that she was going to pick up the child. After saying that, she quickly ran out of the room. Yeonju, in her haste, disregarded the fact that she was pregnant and quickly got into the car, preparing to leave. So-won worriedly followed, saying that he would drive. But Yeonju insisted on going herself. Suddenly, a taxi stopped beside them. Seeing Soo-mai helping the child out of the car, So-won and Yeonju hurriedly ran over. When the child saw Yeonju, she called out, "Mommy." Yeonju told So-won to take the child to bed first. Soo-mai knew that Yeonju was very good to the child and had completely won her heart. Soo-mai told Yeonju that she wasn't suitable to raise a child and promised that she would never see the child again. If the surgery was successful, Soo-mai would live her own life. After saying that, Soo-mai gave the child's backpack to Yeonju. Inside, Soo-mai had left a picture of herself. If the child wanted to meet Soo-mai when she grew up, she should ask Yeonju to give her the gift. On the back, there was Soo-mai's contact information. For the first time, Soo-mai sincerely expressed her gratitude to Yeonju. Yeonju also promised to give the gift to the child. Watching Soo-mai's retreating back, Yeonju knew that Soo-mai was definitely reluctant. But in the end, Soo-mai was still willing to let go. It seemed that Soo-mai's love for the child was no less than her own. Ae Rai handed over Michu's evidence of crimes to Taeyang. Min-ho, completely fed up with Michu's behavior, finally wanted to go to the afterlife with her. Although he was only seriously injured, he could not escape punishment. Everything had settled down. Calvin also officially returned to his ancestors, and the family happily reunited. Hwa Young and Young-do also reconciled like in the beginning, living warm days together. After the rain, the sun shined again. Half a year later, Ru-rai and Taeyang finally held a romantic and simple wedding, witnessed by all their friends and family. This drama is really close to life. Life is inherently a mess. Every stage of life has its own difficulties. For life, we can only cherish and love it.